people who either will be joining late or have to leave a little early, that sort of thing. So we'll just roll with that. We have a quorum of Marine Planning Committee members here, and so we will get going. I'll give a few sort of opening remarks, and if I can find my notes. And then I will turn it over to the co-chairs, Mike and Susan. I know Susan is also, she has a competing meeting too. So Mike, will probably depend on you to walk through the agenda and, talk about any next steps, that sort of thing that we need to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is, oh, good. Someone already started recording. Thank you. That's why I love my team. So just so everyone knows, this is a publicly noticed meeting of the Pacific Fishery Management Council's Marine Planning Committee. The MPC is tasked with tracking primarily offshore wind energy development and planning issues on the West Coast and also aquaculture opportunity areas. So this meeting is focused on those two items. We have draft programmatic EISs out for both the NOAA AOAs and for BOEM's 5 California leases off of California. Mike, I'll let you go through the agenda in just a sec here. But I did want to clarify that this is a public meeting. You are being recorded. We typically don't put our faces on camera. You're welcome to if you like that, but you're totally welcome to not as well. I won't be. Let's see. I think that was really it. Everyone knows the routine here. For questions, please raise your hand. The priority will be for Marine Planning Committee members, but as time allows, we can take questions or comments from others as well. But sometimes we do need to, I'll keep an eye on the time, and if time does not allow for non-MPC members, then that's just the way it is. Sorry to say. That said, there is a public comment period later in the afternoon at 3:45 p.m. If you're someone in the public who can't stay till the end of the meeting, and but you really do want to make a public comment, just send me and or Mike or Susan a chat to let us know, and we'll make a plan for fitting that in. I thought there was one more thing I was going to say, but it has escaped me. So I think what we'll do is just get moving here, and I'll turn it over to Mike to walk through the agenda and talk about very generally sort of what the expectations are today. And then just so you know, at the end of the meeting, the MPC will talk more specifically about dates and assignments and things like that. Oh, I know. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we have, or we should by now, some reps, yes we do, from the Habitat Committee, the Council's Habitat Committee. So the outcome of this will be that the MPC and the HC will take the lead on drafting up comment letters. They will go through the Council's quick response process, which isn't always super quick, but what it means is that when a comment period doesn't overlap with an actual council meeting, which in this case it doesn't, we have a procedure to let the council review draft letters and approve them, and then have them sent out on the council's behalf. So anyway, I think that's enough of the overview for now. Thank you everyone for joining us today, especially Salia, who will start the meeting, and then we have BOEM staff who will be joining us later if they haven't already. So Mike, that's I think enough from me. Why don't you go ahead and give your opening remarks and we can move forward.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. Appreciate the overview of your stuff. As those of you who are on here know, this is not your atypical Marine Planning Committee meeting that we typically have 6 to 8 weeks before a council meeting. This one was scheduled and is intended to solely focus on the 2 draft programmatic EISs that are out there for public comment. We have Celia Barroso from NMFS, of HMS fame, but now on the aquaculture side of things. She's going to give a presentation on the NOAA's draft programmatic EIS for the identification of aquaculture opportunity areas within the Southern California Bight. The comment deadline for that closes. I'm going to talk slowly so that I can pull it up. Closes on the 20th of February. And then once Celia has completed it and we've been able to pepper her with questions, BOEM will be in to provide a presentation and an overview of their draft programmatic environmental impact statement, which is covering the 5 lease sites off of California. The public comment period for that closes on February 12th, so 8 days before NOAA's public comment period ends. So it's going to be a busy month of January for those of us on the Marine Planning Committee and the Habitat Committee as we work to get draft letters done so that we can get them to the council for their review and ultimately submitted to the agencies as public comments. As we go through today's call and we hear it from the presentations, if you can listen with an eye towards how you as an MPC member or through the Habitat Committee can help frame the comments that we're going to be submitting, that would be very helpful. These are 2 lengthy documents. I think the BOEM one, including all the appendices, is roughly 1,000 pages, and the one from NMFS is 430 or so, 430 or so. So there's a lot of material to cover and a lot for us to do here over the course of the next month and a half. And we'll be, in the email I sent around yesterday to the Marine Planning Committee, we threw out a proposed timeline for the comment letters for each of those, and we'll be discussing those more and getting your inputs on it and seeing if those work with everybody. So I think I got it covered, Carrie. I think we'll you want to introduce Celia and then we can jump right into the AOA stuff, unless I forgot anything.
No, I don't think so. I forgot one little ground rule that I like to stay up front, and that is we have a chat feature. You're welcome to use it. Please use the chat only for sort of logistical things or to post a link. Please don't post your substantive questions that you want to direct at the speaker or anyone else. It's too hard to maintain sort of 2 separate lines of communication. So again, do use the chat for any sort of clarifying or logistical type of things, or to post links like what I just did. But if you have a question that you want to direct, either raise your hand or you can send one of us an email and we can fit it in as needed, that sort of thing. So I guess we can now turn to Celia Barroso. Celia, I'm going to let you, actually, there's your title right there. Celia is the fairly new Regional Aquaculture Coordinator for California for the National Marine Fisheries Service West Coast region. She's, as Mike mentioned, she was in the highly migratory species world for quite a while and did a lot of international management in that as part of her duties when she was there, and now she's one of the aquaculture coordinators. So Celia, I will share your slideshow here and let you introduce yourself again or correct anything that I said, and go for it. We have an hour about for this agenda item, and that should include Q&A. So just sort of keep an eye on that time, and I say take it away.
Thanks, Carrie. I think you introduced my roles over the last 12 years at NMFS pretty well. But yes, I started in aquaculture arena about a year ago in a detail and took on the permanent position as the Regional Aquaculture Coordinator, or the RAC, for California in July. So maybe with that, just offer me some grace. As Carrie's pulling up the screen, there we are. So I'm here to talk to you all about the draft programmatic environmental impact statement for the identification of aquaculture opportunity areas in federal waters off of Southern California, otherwise known as the SoCal DPEIS on AOAs. So we'll keep some of the acronyms just out of ease. Next slide, please. Today, my goal is just to provide you with some objectives, a background, including an overview of NEPA and timeline. I do apologize if some of this is redundant for those of you who have been through this process now and were part of that timeline, but I think it'll be helpful to walk us through what we've done and how we got here. And then we'll go through the purpose and need and proposed action of this document, the alternatives analyzed. I'll do a brief overview of the resources analyzed and then show you and describe how you can submit comments. Next slide. So an objective on my end is to orient you to the document. As Mike noted, it is a very lengthy document. Good news is that, a lot of it is also citations and things. And while I encourage you to sit back and relax on your holidays while reading this document, I'm hoping that today what I can do is show you what's in there and maybe point out some key things that have come up either in past council comments, for example, and maybe you'll be able to focus your energy on some of those priorities for you. I want to know that this is not a formal opportunity for NIMS to accept comment. We are under the normal NEPA process. And at the end of this presentation, you'll see a slide that does tell you how to submit formal comments. You can download the EIS. I did provide the link there. And because I forgot our technology that we've been using for the last 5 years, I offered a tip that you could just Google Southern California Aquaculture Opportunity Area, and the first website that pops up should be ours. But here, I'll put it in the link in the chat. And there it also provides more information, details on what you'll see here today, as well as the avenues for providing comment. Next slide, please. Okay, moving into the background. In 2020, an executive order titled Promoting Seafood Competitiveness and Economic Growth was put forward, and it was intended to address this increasing demand for seafood and to facilitate long-term planning for marine aquaculture development. And in particular, the Section 7 directed NIMS to identify geographic areas suitable for commercial aquaculture and complete a programmatic EIS under each area under the NEPA. And so that takes us to where we are. Now, NOAA Fisheries then selected the federal waters off of Southern California as one of the first 2 regions for potential AOAs. As you might have seen in a number of emails that have gone out on this, another published at the same time was a AOA EIS for the Gulf of Mexico by our counter agency in the Southeast region. I would like to note that the identification of an AOA under this entire process does not prohibit aquaculture outside of an AOA. So just some of what I'd like to orient you to throughout this document is, some context about what this document does, what it doesn't do, and maybe what it can do. And this is one case of what it does not do, which is prohibit aquaculture applications coming in for areas outside of an AOA. Next slide, please. Okay, so just for a brief overview of NEPA, it's a procedural statute that ultimately is intended to disclose environmental impacts. And so NEPA will consider both beneficial or good and adverse or bad impacts to the environment, which along with our physical and biological environment include things like natural, cultural and historic resources, public health and safety, climate change, environmental justice, and cumulative impacts. And so we'll go through those a bit in the upcoming slides as well. Thank you. So what is a programmatic EIS? It's used when an agency plans new policies or programs that may include actions occurring in the same region. It is They might have common subject matter or methods of implementation, or if the plan encompasses potential future NEPA assessments that may all have similar impacts, but maybe with a narrow scope, such as project-specific or site-specific assessments. It considers a range of alternatives, including a no-action alternative. As you'll see in the next slide, it is shaped very much by public and stakeholder input. And this programmatic analysis may be used to inform NEPA processes for individual projects proposed later in time. Programmatic EIS might also help eliminate repetitive discussions of the same issues. Next slide, please. And here's where we walk through some of the timeline that occurred since that executive order was published. And in 2020, NIMS published a request for information that solicited public input to help identify data needs, data sources, and project requirements for offshore aquaculture in both the Southern California region and the Gulf of Mexico. At the same time, the National Center for Coastal Ocean Science and COSS was working with the NIMS regional offices in Southern California to collect data for spatial modeling analysis for the region. And that ultimately ended up in a peer-reviewed technical memorandum called an Aquaculture Opportunity Area Atlas for Southern California Bight. From this point forward, I'll be referring to this as the Atlas. Using the Atlas, information collected during the request for information, NIMS published a notice of intent to prepare a programmatic EIS, which initiated the NEPA process. So again, we were soliciting comments at that time and had a couple of webinars as well. NIMS published a public scoping report describing the public comments received, and those were then considered in developing this draft EIS that you have in front of you now. So I'd just like to know that there was plenty of public engagement and plenty more to come. Next slide. This programmatic EIS has 3 cooperating agencies, the Environmental Protection Agency, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the U.S. Coast Guard. Next slide. All right, moving more into the substance of the document itself now. The proposed action is to identify one or more AOAs that may be suitable for multiple future offshore aquaculture projects in federal waters off of the Southern California Bight, so outside of state waters, and to evaluate the impacts of siting aquaculture in those locations. This programmatic EIS will consider all types of commercial aquaculture, including finfish, shellfish, macroalgae, or multi-species aquaculture. Identifying AOAs is a long-term planning effort, and it's not a regulatory or permitting action. Again, this is one of those areas I want to emphasize of what the document does and does not do. It does not propose to authorize or permit any specific aquaculture-related activities or any individual aquaculture projects. Future aquaculture projects will have to go through their own usual permitting process. Next slide, please. The purpose and need of this document is ultimately what led to the chosen preferred alternative identified in the draft EIS. The purpose is to apply a science-based approach to identify AOAs in federal waters. The goal of identifying AOAs is to promote American seafood competitiveness, food security, economic growth, and to support the development of domestic commercial aquaculture, consistent with sustaining and conserving marine resources and applicable laws, regulations, and policies. You'll see that this language does align itself pretty well with the executive order. And then the need is to meet the directives of the executive order to address the increasing demand for seafood, facilitate long-term planning for marine aquaculture development, and to address interests and concerns regarding offshore marine aquaculture siting. Next slide, please. This EIS has 4 alternatives, of which are broadly regionally based, and then we have a couple of sub-alternatives. I note that the use of AOAs does create a predictable area for aquaculture development, which may have beneficial impact on communities in creating predictability and focusing aquaculture in an area that's already been evaluated and assessed to be most suitable in Southern California. And so in response to comments, what you have here compared to perhaps if you're recalling the notice of intent are these sub-alternatives. We have alternative 2, which would identify at least 1 and up to 8 AOAs off of Santa Barbara. Alternative 3, which would identify up to 2 AOAs off of in the Santa Monica Bay. And then alternative 4 would identify up to 10 total AOAs from both regions combined. The sub-alternatives that we've analyzed look at the potential to site macroalgae and shellfish aquaculture facilities only, or to site all types of aquaculture, which would include finfish and integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, otherwise known as IMTA. Shellfish, for the context of this EIS, are molluscan shellfish, such as oysters, clams, mussels, scallops, and abalone. Next slide, please. This is just to show you the context of the locations. And each AOA, while given a beautiful little square, isn't necessarily just a square. In this little Swiss cheese diagram here, those holes in the middle of, say, that left side, those are areas to avoid, maybe perhaps for habitat concerns. Again, this all came out of the Atlas, which conducted a pretty big spatial analysis. This site off of Santa Barbara ranges up to 15,000 acres and is located between approximately 5 and 10 nautical miles offshore. Next slide, please. And then off of Santa Monica, this is located between 4 to 5 nautical miles offshore, and the total acreage is up to 1,500 acres. Next slide. And then off of both areas, you can see here, this just combines it with the total combined acreage up to 16,500 acres. Next slide. All right, so the bulk of the analysis is going to be in chapter 3. And that's where we go through the physical environment, biological environment, and a few others. And so I thought here you can see on the screen the various resources that are analyzed and topics, but I might just highlight a few that perhaps are of particular importance to some. But as you can see, the document does contain quite a bit. So if you're interested in other topics, feel free to explore that. Each section in this chapter describes the relationship. Oh no, go ahead, keep the original slide. We're gonna be here for a little minute. Each section in this chapter describes the relationship of resources and trends to the potential impacts that might occur as a result of the aquaculture activities, ranging from 1 to multiple facilities. In other words, there's a range of acreage with aquaculture facilities cited within the AOAs. You'll see throughout, this chapter that in some cases, alternative 4, which was selected as the preferred alternative because it best meets the purpose and need of the EIS, might offer the potential to disperse the impacts, right? Depending on how many facilities are there. Others, it could compound the impacts. So the intent here is to provide a range. In the physical environment, it's worth noting that under the no action, there would be no AOAs identified, and there would be no changes or impacts to baseline conditions. But there is the potential adverse impact due to potential inefficiencies in permitting and environmental review processes for future aquaculture activities. While resources such as the Atlas could be used to assist project proponents in siting decisions, with ad hoc siting, there is the potential for inconsistent site suitability analyses and processes and lack of data access. This is an administrative planning effort. And so for alternatives 2 through 4, that are analyzed under each of these. It supports long-term planning for marine aquaculture development in U.S. federal waters. It provides information to help inform the aquaculture industry when considering locations to site future operations, and assist the regulatory authorities in providing information to support the permitting and environmental review processes for operations located within those locations. While the identification of AOAs does not change the existing regulatory authorities or processes related to permitting offshore aquaculture, there may be a potential beneficial impact in the efficiencies and in particular the environmental review processes for future aquaculture applications. Perhaps moving into the marine managed areas and special resource areas, it's just worth noting that none of the areas listed below overlap with any AOA options. The water quality section, for example, does describe the impacts of effluent discharge, where variation is largely attributed to feed type and quality. Harmful algal blooms are discussed in that section. Pollution due to operations such as vessel fuel and chemicals and spills. These are all the things that are discussed in water quality that might be of particular interest to some of you. Air quality and acoustic environment are also in that first section of the physical environment. In the biological environment, this EIS covers the federally protected species, which discusses the impacts to ESA listed species, marine mammals, and those covered by the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Stressors that could be introduced and therefore are further discussed in this section include fisheries bycatch, vessel strikes, invasive species, human disturbance, habitat degradation, and pollution and disease. I note that the Atlas had considered some highly vulnerable species, and Table 5 in our appendix lists all these federally protected species, and any of those with an asterisk next to it are those that were not necessarily considered in the development of the Atlas, which then directly led into these AOA options. But there really aren't too many. It might be worth noting that there's critical habitat for humpback whales that overlaps with two of the options in alternative 2 in the Santa Barbara area, but there's no critical habitat designated in the Santa Monica Bay AOA options. And you're going to see this a lot in the document, that the impacts maybe depend on what's done, not only in quantity, but some of the specifics. So for example, for marine mammals, longline shellfish gear, seaweed gear might increase entanglement risk compared to pens, but finfish pens could cause aggregations that increase the potential for disease spread. So again, I think what you'll see throughout this document is an explanation of the range of possibilities. In that same section, we go into wild fish stocks. And this is where you'll see the habitat, I think, areas of potential concern, HAPSES. Somebody else can correct me on that acronym definition. And I note that HAPSES were considered in the development of the AOA options in the Atlas. Stressors that could be introduced as a result of siting aquaculture, again, not as a result of identifying the AOAs, but just as a result of the inciting aquaculture within an AOA. That could be things like fixed gear and equipment placement, artificial light, noise, risk of debris, human interactions, new aggregations, effluents, risks of escape, parasites, vector transmissions, and the risk of introduction to non-native species. And so these are things that are discussed in that section that, again, I think may be of importance to you all. Escapement and associated risk is given, I guess, special notice in this section. I want to note that NIMS aided in the development of the Offshore Mariculture Escapes Genetic Assessment Model. This is developed by scientists down at the Southwest Fisheries Science Center. We fondly call it OMEGA. And the papers surrounding this model are currently submitted for publication, and so they should be available ideally before this thing, before we finalize this document. And we expect that these reports describe the types of escape and interactions that occur for different types of aquaculture, potential competitive and genetic effects on wild species, and mitigation measures to minimize the adverse effects from escapes. We did have a draft in developing that, and so you'll find that there is reference to what was in the draft of the document, or the draft of these technical reports, and they are incorporated into the draft of the EIS. Many drafts. On the ecologically important marine communities, just to note that there's some of the stressors that could be introduced and are then further discussed in that section are regarding increased vessel traffic, the risk of effluents and debris, and localized changes to physical and chemical characteristics of the water column. Localized changes to habitat characteristics and quality, the potential escape of genetic material, and the effect of fish aggregating devices. And I want to note that in this document, we've referred to a FAD, but it is not necessarily the same as a FAD on which fishing vessels use to fish. These are just more of a structure that could create a FAD effect, for example. Again, omega is brought up here and raises the likelihood or lack of escaped or dispersed organisms contributing to significant genetic change in wild populations. But again, it's dependent on the species, although thought to generally not be high. In the potentially farmed species section, this document does recognize that NOAA does not have the authority to authorize specific species for future aquaculture projects, but it does discuss the native or naturalized species that are thought to be potentially suitable in an AOA. And I note that on page 161, there's a list offered. Next slide, please. And then we go into the socioeconomic environment, which covers a range of issues, but perhaps a couple of the more, I guess, those that maybe are of most interest are commercial fishing, recreational fishing, and environmental justice. And so, again, things are highly dependent. There's more commercial fishing activities in Santa Barbara as opposed to Santa Monica. However, adverse impacts could be reduced if facilities are spread out across both regions. So we go into that. It's noted that there's potential disruptions to fishing ground access, navigation impacts could occur. So these are some of the things that are discussed in that section. Similarly, for recreational fishing, there's probably some similar stressors there. There could be impacts that are temporary due to construction as opposed to those that are maybe longer term from the facilities themselves. The FAD effect could provide a benefit to recreational fishing, but could also increase costs due to, as a result of these new operations, and therefore having to avoid facilities and increase the time transiting. It's noted in there that aquaculture could change fish distribution between the Santa Monica and Santa Barbara basins. We go into the market and regional food systems, which highlights some of the market values related to the marine economy, seafood industry, and existing aquaculture industry. There's a section on the ports and working waterfronts, which is something that future projects would have to consider anyway, but this EIS offers some baseline conditions and does provide some suggestions for what should be analyzed in a future project. For example, as what would be required under the Regulatory Flexibility Act. So you'll see in that section that there's a suite of recommendations on what a future analysis should include. And what has happened throughout, and is happening in this section as well, is that there's going to be overlap amongst these various topics and resources. And so in this case is where you start to see some more discussion on vulnerable communities. And that overlaps with some of the discussion on the environmental justice considerations later down the line. We cover information on tourism and recreation, transportation and navigation. On that latter one, the Coast Guard is responsible for safeguarding navigation. So we have information on what's needed there. Information regarding the offshore energy and public services, with a brief background discussion on offshore energy and services that are not necessarily addressed elsewhere, including offshore oil, gas, wind energy, submarine utilities. And in general, it's noted that we are not anticipating any impacts from alternatives 2 through 4, given the geographical distance from any of these structures. Public health and safety is also discussed, and then environmental justice. Again, for some of these latter documents in particular, latter sections in particular, this EIS doesn't get into the details because of our inability to project what a future project is going to look like. And so the EIS does, however, provide tools and suggestions on what should be considered in any site-specific NEPA analyses in the future. Next slide, please. In that chapter 3, it wraps up with the cultural and historic environment. Again, a lot of the spatial analysis included some of these considerations, and future spatial analyses could also consider any culturally important areas to the tribes, for example. Chapter 4 assesses the cumulative impacts and climate change. Again, everything really just does depend. And so future projects will ultimately need to comply with the Clean Air Act and quantify the greenhouse gas emissions a bit more. But I understand that the council has expressed interest in understanding the impacts to climate change on projects out in the water. And so this document does go into that to some capacity, but again, it should be noted that future projects will need to go through a much more detailed analysis in light of their own specifications. So in this section, the cumulative impacts, there is some discussion on mitigation and the existing permitting requirements that would further evaluate project-specific impacts. I note that offshore wind is included in here at this time. It was noted to disclose out here at this time that in terms of climate change, that aquaculture could contribute to climate change by increasing greenhouse gas emissions that would result from their operations. But it might also mitigate some of the climate change impacts by providing improved food security. Also in this section is a discussion on harmful algal blooms and domoic acid events that have occurred in Southern California. And so just wanted to orient you all to some of the information in the document. And I hope that that's been helpful instead of having to try and get through all these pages on your own. Next slide, please. On how to submit comments, again, this is not the time for a formal comment, but we will have 2 actual comment sessions where we will be accepting oral comments, and that will be on January 23rd from 1 to 3 p.m. Pacific time and January 28th. Not 2028, it's going to be in 2025, actually, from 5 to 7 p.m. Sorry about that typo. You can also submit written comments. So those of you from the public, we're anticipating the council providing a comment, but individually, people are encouraged to also provide their comments. And you can do this at regulations.gov by searching this identifier, NOAA-NIMS-2022-0051, and then click comment. Or you can email the comment coordinator, which is me, at socalaoa.wcr@noaa.gov. Or you can snail mail me at the Long Beach office, and the address is listed here. As noted by Mike earlier, comments are due no later than February 20th. So this is a 90-day comment period. We had hoped that by having a nice extended period, it'll give people a chance to come back from the holidays and drill down on this document. We can leave this slide up so folks can take some notes down if needed on it. And I'm happy to take any questions as I can at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Celia. I threw into the chat the link that you posted earlier and I posted it before I realized that you'd already posted it. But for those of you interested in registering for those 2 listening sessions. There's about halfway through the document that is linked there. You can sign up to register for those. And if anybody has any questions, I don't see any hands raised yet, but you're not off the hook, Sally, because I have a couple of questions, but I was going to wait to see if anybody else did first. And since I don't see anybody else rushing to raise their hands, I have 2 questions and they're unfair, and you'll probably have to get back to me on it. And I apologize in advance. But one of the, and I forget where I saw this, right? But it talked about deep water and open ocean and how those types of facilities are located in deep water and or open ocean. The dispersal effect of things with, increased currents and all that. And this is in terms of effluent and other things that you would expect from either the fish farming activities or some of the waste that you would get from the mariculture operations. Are these locations considered deep water and or open ocean?
Yes, I believe so. What I can do though is promise to come back if I'm wrong. How's that?
Nope, that's fair. And then I do see there's a hand up, but I have a second question. And I think you mentioned this, like you mentioned the oil seeps, and if you didn't, I apologize. But there are oil seeps that according to the document, put out between 5,000 and 7,000 gallons a day. And then there was a study reference from the 80s that highlighted that there were no problems associated with those seeps. Given the proximity of those seeps to that AOAs that are sort of sandwiched between Santa Barbara and Ventura, were those areas tested, or have those areas been tested to ensure that the potential pollution or negative attributes from those seeps would not impact aquaculture operations in those areas?
I don't know. Like you said, I would be happy to get back to you.
Okay, thanks. And sorry, I was jotting them down after you started talking, so I didn't get a chance to send them to you beforehand. I apologize for that.
Oh, no, that's no problem. I don't mind following up via email with you, Carrie, and you guys could, of course, distribute the response. But I'll look into it.
Okay. And then I have one more question, but it's not related to anything in the document itself, but I'll wait for that. Steve Johnner, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. You essentially asked my question about the depth of what is the water depth in those areas?
Let's see. I am not certain at this time. What I can do is look that up. It's in the document. I can look it up for you. And if it happens to be that we have now moved into either your discussion or when BOEM is on, I'm happy to then maybe post that into the chat or, compile that into an email for the exact depth.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and Steve, if I could just jump in real quick, we used to fish squid down near that area. I don't think that the water depth in those locations is going to exceed 150 feet. It's probably closer to that 120 to the 15 to 20 fathoms, 90 to 120 feet. It's probably something around those depths. My recollection is correct. Steve Scheiblower.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering, to what extent is this process relying on the information that came out of the Atlas project on potential conflicts with fisheries?
I suggest strongly relying on it. We're pulling the AOA options from the Atlas.
Okay. I asked because when we heard a presentation from the National Ocean Service people, I think, there were questions raised about the level of expertise and involvement of local fishermen and what have you on this identification. And there was no opportunity to provide comments to that Atlas process. And so that kind of makes me question about, whether or not you need to do somehow some more outreach to actually talk to people in the area.
Okay. I can't speak fully to what outreach was done by NCOS with NOS. But I can seek that. I don't believe that we would have an opportunity to adjust the Atlas analysis at this time. I can say that they did use information either from AIS, from the VMS data, and that there were meetings conducted. Again, this is a bit before my time, but I'm recalling from my HMS capacity having, seen some of these meetings come through. And so I would be happy to engage on more and having an understanding, but also encourage you to provide a comment that provides the concerns from fishermen about the areas that are identified here for AOAs.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. I see Corey Niles is next, and then Mike O.
Yeah, hi, Corey. Excuse me, that's Corey with WFW. Hastily attempted to ask you
Hi.
an albacore question, but I have not dove into any detail of the document. But I'm, all this time paying attention, I've been thinking that the Washington doesn't need to worry too much about what would go on down in Southern California in these areas. Then, subsequently we've found out that sardines from Japan crossed the Pacific and are now commingling with our West Coast sardine stock. So it got me, I think, thinking, in terms of the species, like, in finfish, and is there any kind of discussion about which species would be like the least risk for the, I know you mentioned genetic, I forget
there is a discussion in there under potentially farmed species, which, what page did I say that was on? But some that I just offhand that I can recall from the document itself are yellowtail, for example, being a low risk species. I can tell you albacore was not raised as one of them for that. If that helps you.
Definitely.
Let's see, it's under potentially farmed species. Give me a second.
Yeah, and I can look
at that.
I could look it up for sure. So I'll dig in here. But okay, yeah, thank you very much.
Okay. Sure.
Mike O.
Two questions, one for you, Mike, but thanks for the presentation, number one. But are there any studies like worldwide that, or through some science academy or something, that kind of give a profile of how wild fisheries, wild capture interacts with aquaculture?
There is a discussion about that in this document. I can't at the moment tell you which specific ones are in there. We do have a whole section on wild fish stocks, and that will discuss the potential impacts to wild fish stocks from siting aquaculture in an AOA, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to look at it yet, but I was just
no problem.
curious if there's been, I guess, international studies or something like that. And Mike, question for you is, you said what the depths were. Are these areas, since you've had experience down there, are they squid areas, or do you know specifically?
I haven't compared GPS coordinates. I can say with certainty that they are near squid areas. But I've asked Mark Fina to reach out to his folks in CWPA, particularly those who fish squid around that area, to see if those AOAs follow that. I know that the Atlas did some work in some microgrids on where the squid activity occurred in relation to the AOAs, and that was so long ago now I forget the degree of overlap, but I believe there was some overlap.
Okay, thank you. The Northwest, as you know, and even Alaska has, or did have, some number of people or have entered that fishery as well. So you know that though.
Yep. All right, is that it, Mike?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, perfect. Then on to Scott. Oh, Scott lowered his hand.
Sorry about
Well, I
that.
see no other hands up. Oh, sorry. Somebody tried to. Oh, there you are, Scott. Go
I'm
ahead.
back. I forgot to unmute. Just wanted to compliment Celia on the objectivity of the PEIS. It seems, in looking at this one and the other one we looked at, this one seemed to be objective. The no action alternative had, real. It just seemed more genuine. It seemed like they put some real effort into making a realistic comparison. So I just wanted to say thanks. I thought it was good. I didn't read the whole thing, obviously, 400 pages, but what I saw in
Thank you, Scott. I just want to note that this effort started well before my time in my role here and had a rather large team of writers. So I will accept thanks on behalf of all of them.
Sorry, I muted myself. And something that just came through in a text message, Celia, just to confirm that when you mentioned yellowtail, you were talking about California yellowtail and not the groundfish species.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. I don't see any other hands from any Marine Planning Committee members, Carrie, but I do see that Travis has his hand up. Or since we got a little bit of time between now and when we're expecting to see folks from BOEM, do you want to go ahead and if folks from the public have any questions for Celia, allow them to ask?
Yeah, you read my mind. We have a little bit of time, and so go ahead and we can take questions from non-MPC members if you wish.
Perfect. All right, Mr. Hunter, it's all you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thanks, Celia. I just had a quick comment, and I don't know if I've got a question behind it as well, but in the purpose and need, you had mentioned an increased demand for seafood, and I, as a commercial fisherman and harvester, an increased demand for seafood always sounds like a good thing, but it doesn't always kind of jive with what we're seeing in the marketplace. And I'm just wondering, if you could kind of explain the disconnect of what we hear. I mean, I understand that, some species are more desirable than others, but there seem to be a lot of underutilized species that I believe could fill that increased demand that don't seem to be doing so. So I'm just kind of curious as to the thought process into that and the purpose and need.
Thanks. I admittedly can't fully speak to what went behind the drafting of the executive order itself from 2020. But that's, if you go to, if Carrie has these slides, but the background on the executive order that I showed, you'll see that a lot of that language mirrors the purpose and need language that is in this. And it's because of that executive order that we are doing this EIS. And so I just want to make that connection here. As for what you're seeing out on the markets, I am not an expert on that and I can't truly speak to it. But there is an analysis in here, and I would encourage you then to maybe take a look at the socioeconomic sections on markets and regional food systems in Chapter 3. It's under the section of socioeconomic environment, which I think is section maybe D or E, and take a look at that and see if there's information in there that could be characterized differently, and maybe the comment could be provided along those lines.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And I do understand that came from the executive order, so
Okay.
might not have been a fair question to you. Thank you.
No problem. And I mean, I think there's the broader understanding that the United States does import quite a bit of seafood, quite a bit of aquacultured seafood, and that the United States is unable to meet that demand. Now, some of the nuances you just highlighted are what that demand looks like, and creating maybe perhaps a new market with some underutilized species and so forth. Maybe I'm speaking a little bit on behalf of my HMS world there.
Thanks, Travis. Thanks, Celia. I threw a link to the executive order that you referenced also in the chat for those who are unfamiliar with it. Anybody else have any questions for Celia on their draft programmatic EIS? Carrie, I'm not seeing any.
I'm not seeing any other hands up either. I did have one question, Mike, which you brought up, and forgive me if you already covered this, but this is really for Celia. Is there any particular sort of format or areas that you think that we should focus on, or what would be of most help for NOAA, as far as us preparing and organizing a comment letter?
Great question. One perhaps I should have prepared better for. I think areas that would be, I guess, of focus, when reviewing some of those priority areas for the council, right? This is a large document, and I recognize that not every section is particularly important to one person as it is to another. So whatever those priority sections are for you all, we welcome comments that would improve the document, improve the analysis. If there's any missing citations, that we didn't find, feel free to send that our way.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. And if something else comes to mind, you know how to reach us.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Well, Mike and Susan, we are about 12 minutes ahead of schedule. Not seeing any other hands or discussion. There's a hand up now that I mentioned that. So yeah, we'll turn to Merritt in just a sec. But the one thing that I wanted to say was that since the agenda has BOEM giving their presentation at 2:30, I would rather keep it at 2:30. In other words, not, if we buy an extra 10 minutes, I don't want to move that up just because there might be people joining specifically for that. So anyway, that said, after we finish this discussion, we should take a break until 2:30. Go ahead, Merritt.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if there's a KMZ or KML files available for the West Coast AOAs as they're currently proposed, the current proposals, and or a mapping tool where you can see those shapes against like a nav map.
I don't know, but I can get back to you on that. Again, forgive me and my lack of knowledge of some of the JS tech. Is that like JS mapping files, for example?
Yeah, those are the Google Earth ones. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, Carrie, I see no other hands.
Thanks.
Do you
Yeah,
want,
I was talking, but I was muted. um,
ah,
yeah. So if there's if you want to have a discussion with the MPC right now, or we can follow up later. What do you think, Mr. Chair?
well, I was thinking that we have 25 minutes before we expect Bohm, and rather than taking a 25-minute break, maybe we can start volleying around, volleying around ideas on what the council's comment letter could look like from the Marine Planning Committee perspective, right? I'm fully aware that the HC is going to be working on this as well. And, like we did with, I forget which comment letter it was, but there was a recent comment letter where we kind of merged the two separate pieces of content into one final document. I'm more than happy to at least entertain the start of a discussion about the MPC component of that comment letter, if there's a desire to do so at this time. It makes sense to me, but if it doesn't make sense to others, then we can forego that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good idea. I was just looking through our 2022 comment letter on the I guess that was the notice of intent on the AOAs, which I emailed the link to the MPC.
And
Yeah.
while I've spent some time reading it, I haven't got through all of it, so I don't even have a notion or an idea in my head about the structure of it. But I think hearing from Celia what she thought would be important to include, I think that's going to be very helpful in helping us guide where our thought processes is. I do also want to take into account the comments that Steve Scheiblower made, and I don't know that we necessarily want to relitigate the information that's contained in the atlas, but to the extent the information that was contained in the atlas help come up with the identification of those, or the proposed identification of those AOAs, I think it might be helpful to do that. But that's just me. I don't know if we want to go that far into the weeds. And Carrie, did we mention that in our last letter on that? I can't imagine that we didn't, but I don't know that we did.
I can take a quick look through there and circle back to you.
Does anybody else have any dire thoughts on this? Jessica, please.
Thanks, Mike. I don't think my thoughts are dire, but I would just say it makes sense to me from like the MPC perspective to consider what type of potential fishery impacts are under each of the alternatives and the sub-alternatives, and kind of highlight those, as well as any other potential cumulative impacts. I think that's where this group really focuses in. So maintaining that focus in this comment letter makes sense to me.
No, I agree with that wholeheartedly. And I think, as I started to read through it, there were certain of the specific analysis that wouldn't really apply to, but others where that was definitely at the forefront of my mind as I was reading it. And I think that's a good approach. And Carrie, I quickly went through the 2022 letter that we did, and we do, at least in one place, talk about some deficiencies in the atlas. For example, it's reference to a pink shrimp trawl fishery and Dungeness crab trap fishery that don't exist in the Southern California Bight, but were references doing so. So to the extent that we did that in our prior letter, I don't know that it would be bad form to make reference to that again, or maybe we just incorporate the content of that prior letter in this one and go from there, to the extent that some of that information or some of that content is still applicable. Steve.
Yes, thank you. If I recall correctly, there's a section that speaks to the competition. I don't think they use that word, but the competition between wild-caught products and farm-raised finfish products. And I think we should probably look at that section more carefully and perhaps develop some comments around that, because that in my mind that is an issue.
And I'm just for clarification, you're talking about that's referenced in the draft programmatic EIS document itself?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And that's competition, and this is just for my own, because I know that when we were talking about the project that was proposed off San Diego years ago, that's competition in terms of competition at the market level, not necessarily competition. What's that?
Marketplace competition.
Okay. Jessica, is that a residual? No, a vestigial.
No,
answer?
no, it's a new one. I was just thinking that it might be useful to kind of do a first run through some of like the resources analyzed in this document and highlight which ones the MPC wants to kind of focus in on, because there is a lot here, just to kind of focus the group on where to start thinking about comments. So to Steve's previous point on kind of wild fish stocks, also that socioeconomic environment, commercial and recreational fishing, and markets and regional food systems. So just maybe focusing in on certain sections might help to initiate some of those comments as well.
Yeah, no, fully agree. In looking at chapter 3, I think, in terms of air quality and aesthetics, water quality, those are things that are clearly important, but do they fall within the purview of the Marine Planning Committee? That I don't know. I think, oceanography and climate, seafloor characteristics, the acoustic environment, at least to the extent underwater noise could have an impact on things, those are clearly within our reach. I think all of the items under chapter 3, item C, the biological environment and potential impacts, I think that's all important. Under chapter D, chapter 3, section D, there's a number of places, and this is what Steve was referencing, talking about the markets and regional food systems. But I think those are all ripe for review as well. So I think your approach is a good one, and I think if individually we can look through those, the affected environment and environmental consequences chapter, which is chapter 3, and pick out those items that we can probably that should be of most concern to the Marine Planning Committee or to the council. Then I think that's where we focus at least that portion of our comment letter on that. And that was a long-winded way of saying you're right. Corey Niles.
Yeah, thanks for well, I was just going to say in response to Steve's comment, I'm the only species I see that's one that's managed directly by the council is sablefish on the list. Looking at, but yeah, market competition would happen, for other whitefish. I don't know these others. Apparently, I just Googled the olive flounder, which is, according to Wikipedia, the highest valued finfish in the world. It's from Korea, but no, I was just gonna make that comment that it would be kind of complicated, but sablefish is the only one I'm sure in California you got some state fisheries that target those, but sablefish is the only one I'm seeing. That's from one of our FMPs.
Yeah, thanks for that, Corey. Just looking at what you posted, right? California yellowtail is something that's native to the area. Sablefish isn't native to that area, deeper water there, but sablefish is certainly found off Southern California. California halibut, certainly in that area. I didn't know what an olive flounder is, so thank you for educating me on that. Striped bass, I don't know if they come down. I mean, you hear of one or two caught off the beach every 2 or 3 years. So I don't know that that would necessarily be deemed an invasive species that we'd have to worry about escape of. And obviously white sea bass is something that's grown down there for mitigation purposes and grow out purposes for release into the wild. But that's something that's a native species down there and wouldn't necessarily be too problematic, I don't think, from a finfish standpoint.
Yeah, I think that I guess I could see something like a recommendation to consider when they're doing the detailed approvals of a operation to consider those effects, in detail on market conditions, etc. in the future, kind of thing.
Yeah, thanks for that. I know that was, as I mentioned, there was a offshore finfish project proposed off La Jolla that they were contemplating. What was it? Yellowtail, white sea bass, or cobia. And I think cobia was quickly removed from that list because it was a non-native species that if it had escaped would have become an invasive species given their propensity to take areas over. But I know that there were a number of talks with the proposed developer of that project about cooperation with the local fishing industry in terms of not having that sort of market competition. But that would, I don't know how you would include that in an environmental dock, but to the extent that it could become a best management practice or whatnot, that's something to contemplate for sure. Anybody else have any from the Marine Planning Committee have any thoughts on what you've heard, or if there's anything missing that we discussed? I fully understand and appreciate that, many of us might not have had the time to read through it all. But as we do, we'll obviously be, starting to work through our different advisory bodies to get inputs from our folks. Like I know I'll be reaching out to the HMS folks to get their thoughts on this. I know Susan's planning to do the same with the GAP and Mike with the CPS folks. So we will certainly be able to hopefully shepherd in a good bit of content and hopefully a helpful and productive comment letter based upon what we've heard so far today. You got anything to add, Carrie?
I have nothing to add.
All right, then. And then so I assume we're going to want to take a break before 2:30, just so that folks who might have wanted, who are stuck in another meeting and had intended to get over here for the BOEM presentation. But I just want to remind folks, as soon as we get out with the BOEM presentation, we're going to throw up the timeline that was included in our email from last night. And, if folks can think about how they can assist in either, throwing some bullet points that can be included under a specific section, or if you want to take charge on a specific section, that would be most helpful as well. But, we've got to start thinking about, and even though the comment deadline is February 20th on this document, you'll see, well, as you saw, we don't have until February 20th. I think for this specific item, we had intended to have a draft sort of around towards the end of January, and then 2 weeks before that, a draft on the BOEM one. So there's a lot of work that's got to be done over the course of the next month and a half, and any assistance that folks are willing to provide would be more than welcome and more than appreciated.
Yes, sir. I agree. We'll circle back to that. So why don't we go ahead and take our break now? It'll be just over 10 minutes. And please be back ready to roll at 2:30. And Lisa Gilbane has been here waiting patiently. Thank you, Lisa. So we'll jump into the BOEM presentation and shift gears into that programmatic or draft programmatic EIS. So let's do that. Break until 2:30.
Yeah, just Celia, thank you for attending and walking through the document list. I think that was stupidly helpful. And if we have questions, we know how to get a hold of you.
Yes, thank you very much, Celia.
Well, let me try once to find it.
Okay. And I have one pro tip for you that we've learned through trial and error is that if you if it's in PowerPoint and you're doing
Yeah.
presenter mode, put it in presenter mode first if you can, and then
Okay.
share your screen. Because if you share your screen and then you switch it to presenter mode, it doesn't work so well. Ah, that looks perfect.
Okay. Thank you.
Bravo. Okay, well,
Alright.
so unless Mike or Susan have some other kind of opening remarks here before we launch into the second half of our meeting, I'm looking for you guys to raise your hands if you have anything. If not, then we can move forward with Lisa Gilbane. There's her introduction on the slide. She's the Environmental Analysis Section Chief for the BOEM Pacific region. Lisa has, and all BOEM staff has always been willing and helpful to join any of our meetings and present information, and they show up to our council meetings, including in the November one, so we really appreciate it, and thanks for joining us, Lisa. We have, I think, an hour and 15 minutes for this, which includes Q&A, so I know that you have a fair number of slides to get through, so I will stop talking and turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. I hope this is helpful. And I just want to say the letters that you produce are always very helpful for me. And so just thank you so much because I do recognize how much time and effort it takes. So this is our project, the draft programmatic environmental impact statement. This is the website. We can put it in the chat too. And I'm going to just go over the review of processes to date, a little kind of quick overview of the document, some details, making sure you guys know how to comment and dates, and then we can get into questions. And hopefully I have the answers. So yeah, and then these are the objectives. We're going to provide an opportunity and then make sure you know how to submit comments. All right. So, you know, this is just a slide about how we think about NEPA and how to highlight right now we're in the incorporate public input. Well, we're in the request public input on the draft. So between 6 and 7, we are here. Does my pointer work? That's where it is. Between 6 and
Yes.
7. And
We can see
you
it.
can see it. Okay, that's good to know. I appreciate that. So we have a 90-day comment period, and so the closing date, I'll say this again, is February 12th. And right now, it doesn't look like it would be extended, but I am always wrong when I bet on these things. So that's all I can say about that. But so right now, it's intended to close on the 2nd. We would then publish our final, and our timeline for EISs is 2 years. So the idea is it would probably publish in the fall sometime with a record of decision before the end of 2025. we have, it started in 2022. The leases were auctioned. This is a map of the leases. Hopefully you guys all know where they are, but here's the inset in California, reminding you of the 2 leases in the offshore Port Eureka, and then the 3 leases offshore from Morro Bay right here. And let's see. And just as another reminder, this is not this is a programmatic EIS. We are not making a decision on a construction operation plan. So we had a scoping period. We received a number of comments and form letters. And here's just a breakdown of the types of comments we get. It was a variety of resources, a lot of multiple comments. Fish and resource habitats was 3%. You find that interesting? Let's see. This is another link for our document, and it's on regs.gov. So what is it about? So we are assessing the potential biological, socioeconomic, physical, and cultural impacts that could result from floating offshore wind energy development. So we're looking at the change, the avoidance primarily, or any type of reduction of the impact that could result from a mitigation measure. So to clarify, this is a programmatic document. It is intended to be a kind of framework document and talk about potential construction operation impacts from floating wind offshore California, really for the first time. It does not approve any type of project, and we are trying to consider measures that could be applied across a broad region. So you will notice, and I could talk more about the programmatic that was done on the East Coast for New York Bight, is that it's more valuable when you're looking at resources that are in all of the project areas, the leases, and can go in and out of those areas. So, mammals, commercial fishing, different types of activities, those types of things, we're going to have more to say about impacts than, specific land or onshore problems where we really do need more kind of site-specific, project-specific construction operation. So that we're doing the left-hand side of this now, this kind of broad approach. So hopefully we can tier off of that when we do get a construction operation plan, and then we do a project-specific NEPA. And right now, everyone has agreed that this would be another environmental impact statement. It would have consultations, and it would be very likely a joint document with state agencies. So here's a little map we're trying out, here a little graphic we're trying out for roles and jurisdictions. We get that question a lot. You guys are pretty savvy, this group, but it's a tough one. And so this just highlights that, this is a BOEM effort. We're focused on the offshore. BOEM's jurisdiction is over 3 nautical miles from the shoreline. And the projects we're talking about from the maps before were, 18 to 20 miles offshore. And then our jurisdiction really ends at that Fed state line. And then at that point, there are just different regulatory jurisdictions that lead. So here are the alternatives. A is a no action alternative. So we're really just looking at the baseline, trying to get an accurate description of the cumulative, of the climate related impacts and the affected environment. B, we have a development with no mitigation measures. So just trying to look at what could be the real impacts from offshore floating wind, commercially off Humboldt and Morro Bay. And then C, applying those mitigation measures and seeing trying to think about how they avoid and reduce the impacts. All right, I want to highlight this, which this group also knows about, the representative project design envelope. I want to thank you all I don't know much about it, but I know there's a cumulative effort study work started and you guys are using this. And so thank you. I appreciate it. This is something that the National Renewable Energy Lab produced. It's Appendix E of our document. It's also published separately on our websites. And we we got a lot of good input from the leaseholders as well as American Clean Power. And I think it just represents what we know about floating offshore wind off the California coast, the best we know at this moment. I'd like it to be a document that we can all consider revising and improving upon as we move forward. And I could be part of any effort for NREL or another technical group to do that for us, because I think it's an important resource. So here are some selected elements. If you haven't looked at it yet, it really just talks about looking at plant capacity, a type of range, and from that capacity, estimating the number of turbines, offshore substations, different type of cable arrays, inner cable arrays, as well as export cables. It's a pretty typical layout for an EIS. There is a summary, and you really want to look at section 3.4.1, commercial and for hire recreational fishing, the effective environment impacts. BOEM was able to work with NIMS. NIMS wrote Lisa Pfeiffer and Lila Issei, and many others, pulled together a lot of NIMS economic fisheries related work and put it in a nice report for us. And we utilized as much of that as we could. And we hope it's a better approach and one that some of you have recommended. So I'd like your feedback on that. And Appendix A is the RPDE, which I mentioned, and Appendix E is the mitigation measures. So we considered all the usual suspects for impact and resources, natural and socioeconomic and cultural. And we did try to look at the regional considerations. So I will note we have a broad approach intentionally. So when we're talking about up north in Humboldt County, here are some examples. So for the physical, the large bay tidal flows is certainly a factor. The seasonal upwelling, the special endangered species that are there, birds and mammals. Fishing and navigation, the Dungeness crab is highlighted, and the vessel fairway proposed work is highlighted too for this area. Recreationally, there are unique recreational opportunities up in Humboldt. And then for Morro Bay, just mostly in contrast, the different physical, wildlife, fishing and recreation, and other marine uses. I can go back to these slides, or if you guys have a question, I don't mind if you stop. But I'm almost done. So I kind of feel like we should just move through, and then you can ask me back anything that was not clear. All right, so just the mitigation, because this is a central point in our document, and I think it can be a word that means a lot of things. This is from our National Environmental Policy Act wording, is anything that avoids, minimizes, reduces, rectifies, or compensates for adverse effects to the proposed action or alternatives. So it can be pretty broad. And anyway, we got our list of measures from asking our cooperating agencies and from trying to apply practices that are common or discussed in the offshore space already. And this will allow for room to incorporate additional or different mitigation measures later on when we have more project-specific information. So I've talked about this a little bit, is that I really think this is a good initial discussion. I think this will set the stage type of the things for operators to know are very important and that they're going to have to consider carefully in their plans. And so if their plans do not discuss or talk about ways to reduce or primarily avoid these types of impacts, then it's going to take a lot longer because we're not going to be able to tear off this document, and we're going to have to pretty much start from ground zero. So the idea is that we get a lot of hopefully good comments on how the types of things that are important to avoid and mitigate for. So here are some examples, and I'm trying to give you fisheries examples to not waste your time. So some things that we've seen from other sectors, such as anchoring plans, scouring cable protection, and other things that the communities are talking about in many sectors, such as fisheries community involvement, shared transmission corridors, other monitoring programs. Here's an example of what they look like in Appendix C. So you can see that they have a number and a name and a pretty brief high-level discussion. So we've gone back and forth on the amount of detail that should be in these mitigation measures, and the draft came out with a more a high-level description, and that's not that details won't be very necessary. It's just that this felt like this was relevant to how much we know at this point. So a lot of people in different communities have asked me about how do mitigation measures compare versus community benefit agreements. And I'll be honest, this is something I'm still getting familiar with. I'm pretty familiar with mitigation measures in NEPA land, and CBAs are something that the BOEM just started when we issued the leases in a year ago, really. So if you look on the left, you can see mitigations really are very specifically targeted to the impacting factor. So the effect from the offshore wind development on the activity, and the mitigation has to directly kind of have a clear minimization or avoidance to that impacting factor. So the process involves collaboration and a clear description of how this is happening. And the outcome, if BOEM approves projects in the future, BOEM will consider mitigation measures from the PES as a condition of approval to COP. But again, we can also change them, make them more specific, or remove them if they're not appropriate. So, and then on the right, a community benefit agreement is really a community and a stakeholder group who use, whose use of the geographic space, the lease area, or who use the resources harvested from that geographic space, really are directly impacted by the lessee's activity. And a key difference is this really involves negotiations between the leaseholder and the entity that is working on this to establish a commitment. BOEM does not participate in these negotiations or endorse agreements. So the outcome agreements can include monetary, material, or non-monetary funds. So it can be pretty broad, and really to provide benefits that to directly impact a community and stakeholder groups. So benefits could support things like fishing resilience and adaptability. And that plays into the fact that we know the California Coastal Commission and the 7C Working Group are hard at work doing spending a lot of time. So we don't want to, we understand that, we want to respect that. And this document is a higher level or a framework upon which the 7C should fit ideally pretty nicely, or at least not conflict. So both the EIS and the 7C Working Group, mitigation measures to avoid, minimize, and compensate for impacts to help lessees develop their consistency certification. So that there is overlap, but I think where we are with the programmatic, it'll be fine. And then the 7C will have more specific outcomes. Coastal Commission issues, concurrence, approval with conditions. And, this is just talking about the CZMA part. So but there is an interact. I mean, I can get into CCMA stuff, but it's not relevant for the programmatic. So I don't know that I should right now. Sorry. Okay, public
Hey,
comments.
Lisa, can I ask?
Yeah,
Just go back one slide, please.
yeah, right here.
I see. No, the one right after that one, the one where it talks about the 7C working group portion of it.
Yeah, yeah,
On the
yeah.
third
And I'm
bullet-
done with my slides, so we can talk. This is fine.
Is that third bullet point down? Should that be PEIS or EIS? Because at the point that the COP is submitted, there is no EIS because the EIS will be based on the COP, right?
I agree. It should be PEIS. And this is my first time showing this slide, so clearly I need to do a little editing. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks.
Okay, well, I think I'm done. Let me just make sure real quick. Yep, that's it. So is there any slide anyone wants me to go back to, or should I stop sharing?
I would suggest that you keep sharing for a little bit, and once we start getting questions for folks, if they have questions that are based on a specific side, we can try to guess where that is.
Okay, thank you.
And with that, I'll if anybody from the Marine Planning Committee has any questions on what you've seen from Lisa or on the draft document itself, now would be a good time to raise your hand. And surprisingly, I don't have any questions. You don't have to wait 10 minutes for me to ask my 2 questions. Steve Johnner. Steve, if you're trying to talk, you're muted.
I'm kind of new at this.
No,
Okay.
Go ahead, we
so-
hear you now. Thanks.
Yeah, sorry. So thank you, Lisa, for that presentation. I don't know if I'm more or less confused than I was before, but
Oh, no.
no, I'm kidding. So about the cumulative impacts, you probably have heard me mention that in the past. And reading it, I understand there are the 5 lease areas in California. There are the 2 existing areas in Oregon that are on hold, and nothing in the foreseeable future from Washington. And I understand that as things develop, you will use, I guess, the conclusions of this programmatic EIS as far as dealing with mitigation from additional sites. But can you help me understand that a little bit more? If more are added in the next few years, will you do an additional programmatic EIS? Or do you think you will have learned enough from this one to then just say, okay, this is what to expect from these additional wind areas, and this will be the result as far as cumulative impacts?
Sure. Thanks for that question. It is a tough one. I can't speculate about what BOEM is going to do in the future. I do think that this programmatic effort is a good first attempt, and I know people wanted different types of programmatic documents, but I think this can provide some of what people wanted, which is a discussion of construction and operation impacts before we have a project. And so this does do that. And as once we get the what I've seen on the East Coast is they do build from their efforts. So that their programmatic was in a space where there were finalized consultations, there were construction operation plan conditions of approval, and so their thoughts about mitigations are more precise and more numerous. And so I do think that this will be iterative, but I don't know kind of the path that that'll take. But one last thing is every NEPA document has to look at the space around it and consider the cumulative impacts.
Okay. I think, yeah, I understand that. And as you were talking about the work that's being done on the East Coast, I don't know a whole lot about that. I know, the Northeast is quite a bit different than the Southeast. And, I've been on the ocean in both areas, but I don't think it's quite like we are here with the California Current, the large ecosystem that extends the entire coast. And so I guess the concern remains that as if there'll undoubtedly be some impact on upwelling, there'll be impact on currents and distribution of larvae and so forth and so on. And having just the 5 areas in California and maybe additional ones in Oregon will have some impact, but it may not be very significant. But as you add more, the cumulative impact, that's to me, the example that best explains this is the dams on the Columbia River. And I believe it can be seen that when Bonneville Dam went in, there was minor impact on the salmon runs. But as the additional dams went in over the years, then suddenly the cumulative impact of all those was quite dramatic. So I think this needs to be addressed, and I don't know if there'll be additional sites. Can you help me with that? I read the foreseeable future. There aren't any additional ones, but I know California has very ambitious plans for this. I've heard upwards of 20 gigawatts or 25. Can you shed any light on that?
I don't know anything above what I hear in the public space, but I can say that how BOEM does work really closely with the state of California. So, and we are going to be working with a new administration shortly. So we will figure out the next step is a call for information nominations if the state of California wants to move forward with their wind planning for offshore wind, which they, published that report. So that would be the next step, but I don't know. I have no idea when that will happen. And that gets back to National Environmental Policy Act. We take seriously the regulations that say we have to kind of examine, what is ripe and what is reasonably foreseeable. And so this was the approach that BOEM took on deciding where that line was for the information that we had at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
On to Steve Scheibler.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, for the presentation. I've got a couple of specific, just 2 questions about about the chart that you have. One of them is on demographics, employment, and economics. That's 3.4.3. And in the statement about impacts, it never mentions any economic or job loss impacts to commercial fisheries, whether it's directly to fishermen or deckhands or processors. Was that just an omission, or am I missing something there?
I don't have a ready answer for you on that, but I think it's a good question to bring up. So I can either get back to you or that could be part of your comment.
Okay, thank you. My question number 2 is just regarding section 3.4.1, commercial fisheries. And there's a simple line that alternative B and C would have impacts on commercial fishing, but there's no other detail whatsoever on that. And I can't help but wonder, for both the environmental and the socioeconomic looks that you're trying to give here, shouldn't you be including displacement and the compaction that may come from displacement in that analysis?
I think that's a great comment. I can't answer it specifically now, but that displacement is an impact. So I think if that's something that is not discussed well in the document, then that would be really good to highlight. I don't want to throw anyone under the bus, but my brand new commercial fishing person from BOEM is here. She did not write that draft, so she does not have blame, but she is listening, so we can try to get you better answers to those specific questions.
Thank you.
You good, Steve? I assume because
Yeah,
you went
thanks.
on mute, you are. Roger that. Jessica, you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa, for the presentation. My question's a little bit in line with Steve's. When looking over the draft PEIS in regards to kind of the impact sections, what was BOEM's decision process for the use of more general quantifications of impacts versus using kind of those detailed metrics and ranges that were provided in that project design envelope? It seemed like some were more specific than others.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good comment. It was just trying to match the purpose with the available information. So trying to directly get at, what is a high level type of impact discussion, and then what would lead to a mitigation. So trying to draw that line. So I do think that, I'll be honest, there's probably some inconsistencies in terms of resolution. And so if you see an obvious place where more resolution or higher, kind of quantification is appropriate and would improve the, kind of mitigation results, then that's a really helpful comment to me.
Great, thanks. And one additional question, just while I have the mic.
Yeah.
Looking at some of the mitigation measures, I noticed that like MM-36 is oceanographic monitoring plan. Did BOEM consider a fish monitoring plan? So some of like the concerns around changing fish distributions based on development. Did you think of including that type of mitigation plan?
I can't remember. I'm sorry. The list did change a lot, but I can get back to you. And if the MPC feels that is an omission and a mitigation that would be appropriate and helpful, then please recommend that.
Great, thanks.
Okay. Hey, Victor, I'm going to skip over you for now. We're kind of giving priority to the Marine Planning Committee members and any Habitat Committee members that have questions, but assuming we have time at the end, I'll certainly come back to you. But for now, let's go with Corey Niles.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Lisa. I think some folks have touched on my question already, but when I saw your forget what you called it, but your list of 40 kind of attributes that you were considering impacts to, like birds and bats, and you didn't have room for 40 of those things on that slide, but I'm kind of curious, like on you've heard from this group, and Steve and Jessica touched on the potential changes to the oceanography, hydrology, without having had time to really dig into the document. Did you have thoughts on how that, that's kind of the one fundamental potential change to the ecosystem would be that, change in the wind and the upwelling, and just wondering how that you might have approached that in the document. And second, maybe unfair question, this also reminded me that I saw a poster at the California Ocean Observing Conference last springish time, where Alice Kojima was one of the authors, about some modeling of the oceanography, a workshop you all held, and then there was going to be like a report and follow up from that workshop. And it's, again, unfair to maybe put you on the spot for that, but wondering if there has been any release of that information from that workshop on the oceanographic modeling.
That is not the most unfair question you've ever asked me, Corey, so I don't mind at all. And I'll just give you maybe a little update on I am not an oceanographer, but I know some and they work for us. And so my understanding of their status is, yeah, Alice has just finalized kind of a summary note from that workshop. And I think it's ready to send out to folks, so I can try to get that to you all today if it is out, or at least a note about when it'll be out. And she did a poster as well. And I'm going to look on the website right now. We're trying with our website, and so it is better. And so this, if you scroll down on our website, there should be an upwelling. Yeah, upwelling and offshore wind, what we know. So I'm going to put the link in the chat here. And this is our kind of first try at trying to disseminate useful information about a very technical topic. So I put that in the chat, and we do try to discuss it in the document. I think, to my knowledge, this is the first time that has really ever happened in a NEPA document. So I think it's a good start, but I expect some comments on how we talk about upwelling and how we further the science, the modeling science, and importantly, ground truthing that science, so that we do have some better indications about what we are talking about. But I know that's very active for a lot of groups on the West Coast. I just saw a announcement that DOE is giving a lot of funding to some institutions along the West Coast for offshore wind, and I hope some of that is going into glider ground truthing data that support modeling, so we can really have some better information about this really important topic that I agree it's unique to the California current.
Yeah, thank you for that. I haven't seen this flyer, so great. Yeah, and if you
I'll follow up with the report too.
Thank you very much.
So Lisa, I have a question.
Yes.
And this is based upon today's events. Obviously the lease sites off of Eureka aren't too far. I don't know the exact distance it was from the epicenter of that earthquake. But,
Yeah.
To the extent that, and I don't know if this is more a project specific item or if this is something that could be incorporated in the programmatic EIS, but I know one of the things that has been discussed in one of the 7C working group subgroups is, if there's a catastrophic event like an earthquake and I think the draft programmatic EIS has a little section on that, but let's say that one of the anchors holding one of the turbines in place, let's say the anchoring system for that turbine fails and that turbine ends up collapsing. With the inter-array cables and the connectivity between all of the turbines in that lease site, a recommendation to include some sort of breakaway scheme on there where if one comes tumbling down, they all don't come tumbling down. Is that something that would be better addressed at the individual project stage, or is that something that should be contemplated and considered at this programmatic stage?
I don't have the answers to what should be considered now or versus later. I think it is a little bit of back and forth. So, it's clearly an important risk that's unique to the area. I know in the Gulf, they are always trying to make sure their offshore facilities can withstand, level 5 hurricanes. And I think we need the equivalent of that kind of catastrophe. So I think it's a great, not being an expert, I'd say let's let's suggest it and see, and then really think it through and see if it can hold now, or even if it ends up being something that we have to make sure we put on our checklist for next time. I don't think there's any harm in suggesting something earlier, especially with safety.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Corey Niles, is that a residual hand?
It is, sorry.
Roger that. Scott McMullen.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. Appreciate you being here. I had to say that it seemed to me when I started looking through the tables that maybe some of this was sort of recycled from an earlier one, maybe on the East Coast or something, because I saw things that just didn't seem to kind of fit. For example, let me see if I can find it here. Under 3.3.2, benthic resources, the no action alternative talks about ongoing activities such as repetitive channel deepening and dredging. And, you know, thinking about the areas off California, it's, you know, pretty certain there's no channel deepening or dredging occurring in those things. So is this something that's sort of an amalgamation of old information from elsewhere and information that's gathered specifically for the West Coast? Or for California?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. It's intended to be something that is specific to our project. So if there are things in here that seem like they should be for another area, that is a mistake, and we need to get that out before there's a final. I think sometimes, I mean, there are channels on the West Coast, but I think, but to your point, I think how they're talking about them, you know, you're probably right. So I'll say every NEPA document sometimes comes from a mix of other NEPA documents, but the goal is that this is accurate in reflecting our coast, our resources, and to our best potential impacts that we know of.
Yeah, okay. I noticed under water quality 3.2.2, it included presence of structures. And again, here on the West Coast, I don't believe there's any fixed structures in any of the 5 California lease areas.
No. 3.2.2, I'm writing this down.
Yeah, 3.2.2, 3.3.1 under BATS. But just generally, it sort of seemed like in reading it that there seemed to be, frankly, a little bias or a lack of objectivity, because you look at the no action alternative and it's, you know, things are going to continue to be affected and ongoing, have permanent and temporary long-term impacts, et cetera, et cetera. And then, as I think was pointed out earlier, under alternative B and C, it sort of downplays it. Under water quality, you've got a full block of impacts on the no action. But then under alternative B and C, I expected maybe some discussion of water temperature increases due to the cooling of at the substation level. I'm to understand that there's typically used seawater, and that seawater can be increased in temperature substantially as it flows through the system to cool the transformers. So to me, it just felt like there's not really an objective look at all the impacts. Almost every no action alternative seemed to sort of imply that things were bad and getting worse. But when you put in offshore wind, then things, it doesn't mention that it's almost like all of the bad things that are going on now would somehow stop under the alternatives B and C. Just that was my impression, Lisa. Sorry.
No, I think that's good. So just to make sure I understand, so you're saying that like the descriptions were okay for the no action alternative, but really not integrated into the B and C alternatives, and in fact, maybe a little bit downplayed. Is that
Well,
what you said?
I don't think I'd even agree that the under the no action alternative, the descriptions are altogether accurate.
Okay.
It seems like in a lot of cases they're sort of overplayed in an objective perspective of what we're talking about. I think one place it referred to under the no action alternative, I can't remember where it was, but it talked about anthropogenic noise only in the no action alternative, but under the alternatives for development, B and C, no mention of noise. And I look on the Vestas wind site and their 15 megawatt turbine. Vestas itself says that it's over 115 decibels at full speed. So why are we mentioning anthropogenic noise under the no action alternative, but ignoring it under the development alternatives?
Thank you for that example. That really helps. I appreciate that. I don't have a good answer for you at this time, but that is a good insight.
I mean, I understand that any kind of energy develop has costs, and to be fair, this document should recognize all those costs, both inaction and action. But it just seems like this sort of, to me, I had a sense that it wasn't an objective look.
Okay. That is a helpful comment. I mean, the goal is to be objective, and if if an impact should be brought up, consistently in all the alternatives. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Jessica, please.
Yeah, thanks. Lisa, when it comes to like some of the references for like best practices, and then also thinking about how those then have potential to become mitigation measures, what was the criteria for when a best practice kind of reached a level of being included in that mitigation measure list? Or is there a criteria? Are you looking for comments and feedback on which best management practices could be part of that list? So kind of 3 parts to that question.
I like it. First, of course, I'm looking for feedback, and that is essential focus of the feedback I'm hoping to get from the community. We did our draft with our cooperating agent, our cooperating parties, and also just our personal kind of experience working on different types of projects, primarily oil and gas, and a little bit of the early kind of renewable work that we're doing already. So it's our experience and our cooperating agency experience, but that does not represent the breadth of experience on the West Coast, for sure.
So am I to understand that if there are some best practices, that those could be recommended as potential mitigation measures to be included under some of these?
Correct.
Okay,
Please do.
great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a better way to answer that. Appreciate it.
All right. I don't see any other hands raised, so I'll do a last call of hands from anyone from either the Marine Planning Committee or the Habitat Committee. And if not, then we'll open it up to other folks. Miko.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I'm going to read something here. Phytoplankton of the Northwest U.S. shelf ecosystem from NOAA Fisheries. NOAA Fisheries states there are more than 20,000 species of phytoplankton in West Coast waters. They depend on wind energy that drives upwelling. To quote NOAA Fisheries, almost all life on Earth relies on photosynthetic organisms such as plants and algae for oxygen production. In the Northwest U.S. continental shelf ecosystem, microscopic single-celled algae known as phytoplankton are responsible for nearly all primary production. globally, primary producers generate almost half of the Earth's oxygen and are the base for most marine food webs. They're also important components of carbon cycling and sequestration, end quote. And as I looked in the, did a little bit of scoping of my own in the PEIS, I'm sorry, I find mention of phytoplankton in a number of places, but it doesn't seem like it's really gets a lot of attention for something that might be as important as what NOAA Fisheries is saying in that statement. And I guess, is there any more to come from the evaluation of the phytoplankton, its relationship with upper trophic life, and what may happen, you know, in the event the wind turbines get up to say 50 or 100 of them, not wind farms, I mean. And so there's no cumulative study on that, and this one doesn't seem to really come close. These two regions that they're going forward are quite a distance apart. I wouldn't think there'd be a lot of interplay between the two of them, but if you start putting up more along the north part of the California coast, I could see that becoming maybe a different situation and a different outcome. Is there any thought given to that, or are we ending it here as far as what the PEIS does? Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I mean, it is an important comment and it is an important topic that we need to learn more about. I think everyone's in agreement with that. I think how we talk about it in documents is something we're trying to work through. And I think the criticism is, or the concern is that we need to really understand something before we build a lot. And I think that was Steve Joyner's example with the dams. So to this document, well, I'll just explain what it was trying to do was bring it up as it is part of our environment, upwelling, and the phytoplankton that survive in the upwelling environment are part of our California current. It's part of our environment. And there are some initial modeling. There's one initial modeling work that has been done that indicates in a maximum scenario, there could be some changes to the local upwelling regime as there's in the in the lower third leases you know, when they put in the modeled results, a maximum capacity wind farm. And that's definitely something to be concerned about and to examine more. And so that's why the handout and the report are part of our efforts to do that. This document is trying to focus on what things will be impacted that we can mitigate so that we can avoid or lessen. And so to that extent, if you feel we should bolster our discussion about how upwelling impacts, and then you know what we can do about it to avoid, you know, or space out things, that's a valid comment. But we can't write about it. We have 300 pages, and so there were decisions made about how and what to focus on. But the point of a draft comment period is to see if that is reflective and makes sense to the community.
Yeah, and if I may, I'll just add that, and that's not only with BOEM, but in other studies, that they say many times that, well, the overall output of phytoplankton will be the same, but with 20,000 species, I'm sure you've got, well, I've been told you've got a lot of nutritional differences in species. So, I mean, it is kind of important the natural selection that's taken place be disrupted too much, and we might, no matter how much it produces, it might be a different outcome altogether. But there's a lot of studying that needs to be done, and I don't see it happening yet. So thank you. NIMS may be doing something, but I haven't heard too much about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
All right. Steve Scheibler.
Yeah, on the question about whether or not something like upwelling and its effects can be mitigated, it seems to me that it should be included, number one. And number two, it can be mitigated in the sense of avoidance, simply not having the project if it's severe enough. Or alternatively, creating a much greater spacing between the turbines. But that, in fact, would also create a tension between the viability, economic and electric performance viability of the project, for the developers. So maybe you can respond to that.
I think that's a well-written, articulated comment, and I will try to get that into the document.
Thank you.
Sure.
Arlene.
Hello. Hi, thanks for the presentation. I have a couple of questions. So one is on the figure that is in the benthic resource section 3.3.2. The figure is 3.3.2-1, and it's the figure of benthic resources affected environment. And the paragraph that introduces the figure talks about a 10-mile buffer around the Humboldt and Morro Bay WIAs plus the export cable corridors. And so that this is the affected environment, and this is what we're seeing in the map. So is this basically saying that the export corridors, export cable corridors will be contained within that blue outline polygon of the affected environment?
Yeah, I think the document is trying to kind of limit its discussion, and so just took a most likely or a reasonable approach. But no, it is not. It is not saying that. It is not making a decision on where the export cables are going to be.
Okay, it's a little bit deceiving in the way it's written then, because it kind of implies that this is the area to be affected by both the cables and the leases.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I was unclear about that. And then, yeah, my second question kind of piggybacks on some other comments that were made about the cumulative effects. So the discussion about one project versus 5 projects is basically saying that 5 projects will just be, more of a magnification of the one project idea, or the types of impacts that would occur, but it doesn't really discuss this in terms of the cumulative effects of having 60 to 80,000 acres per project, and then you multiply that, you double it or triple it depending on which lease area. And so there isn't really a discussion about that, particularly under the 5 project section. So just kind of wondering what the thinking was about that.
There's not a discussion of what under the 5 project scenario?
What
type of discussion were you hoping for?
impacts?
Sorry,
So
of
the
in-
cumulative impacts of basically, 250,000 acres as opposed to the 68,000 acres. The fact that you've got a larger spatial area, spatial extent that's now being developed as a whole, even though they're individual projects, the cumulative effect of that on the resources in that larger area.
Okay, so it seems, sorry, I'm just going to say it back to you to make sure I understand. So you're saying that it feels like to you that the cumulative discussion, especially at a kind of more maximal scenario, is missing, or is it just not robust enough?
Yeah, it's basically missing. Yeah.
Missing. Okay, well,
So I'm
then
just curious what the thinking was on that, in terms of developing that section.
I again, I don't have a specific answer for you on that, but I will bring it back to our experts to highlight and review and think about.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Arlene.
All right, anybody else from either the Marine Planning Committee or the Habitat Committee, throw your hand up now. Otherwise, Victor, if you're still on and you still have a question or a comment, by all means, speak now, please.
Yeah, I'm still here. Thank you. Thank you. And thanks for the presentation, Lisa. I just wanted to see if you could go back to the slide that had the pie chart where I think is that it broke down where kind of all the comments went to.
I had 2 pie charts.
It was one of the first ones that you showed that had all the percentages, and you even made a comment
Oh, yeah.
where you thought
This
that
is comments from my scoping period.
from the
Okay,
scoping
yeah.
period.
Thank you
have
for
a look.
asking about a specific slide because I kept this up here the whole
Yeah,
time.
no worries. I just want to have a look at it. That's all I really wanted. I thought it was pretty interesting to see the breakdown of it.
Did I miss it? Oh,
It was one of the first few slides.
oh yeah.
Yeah,
Right
there
there.
we go. Yeah, I just wanted to have a look at this. What other? Because you made a comment that you thought that the fish resource and habitat was a little less, lower of a number than you expected.
That's
Okay.
the percentage of the number of comments, but I, in cases with you, I think the groups that do comment robustly and very helpfully. So it could be that we did get a fewer number of individual comments, but that doesn't mean it wasn't well considered.
Got it. No, thank you. I just wanted to have a look at the slide for a little bit longer than noticed. That was all.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I want to make sure we have, I'm trying to find the scoping report. If you go to Appendix B of the document, that's where we talk about all the comments we received, kind of what they looked like, what they were, and our responses to them.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much.
Sure.
And thanks, Mike, for not forgetting about me.
Yep, not a problem, Victor. And just to clarify, Victor, if memory serves correct, you're with CDFW, correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Hey, Mike.
All right. Anybody else? Carrie Pomeroy, I see you came off mute.
That was by accident. Sorry about that.
Well, hello anyway.
Hi back.
Mike, can you hear me?
Carrie, I can.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, I was just going to say, we turn to Victor, and the last thing on the agenda is the public comment period. So I say, let's open it up. If there are any members of the public that have a comment you'd like to make now, it's a good time to do it. But also just note that any formal comments need to be conveyed via their the portal or in the scoping or the meetings that are coming up near the end of January. But if there's anyone who has a comment you'd like to make, go ahead and raise your hand. Since that we might be sliding into the part of the agenda where we talk about next steps, logistics, assignments, timeline. If we don't see any other comments, questions, or that sort of thing. From Merritt.
Yeah, so I just want to make a comment with respect to the aquaculture opportunity areas. I put a link to the document I'm referring to in this comment in the chat. I noticed in figure 1 for the Santa Barbara area AOA proposal, the very far western coordinate that's listed, that's shown in that chart doesn't quite match up with where the shape is. And so I think that probably needs a fix.
Yeah, thanks for that, Merritt. If you can funnel the exact, Celia's not here right now, so I think in terms of her hearing this, she's not. So as a member of the GAP, if you can funnel that through Susan so that we can make sure to include it in, a potential council comment letter on that, I think that would be very helpful and just the kind of thing that we're looking for.
Okay, very good. Yeah, it looks like it's a good 8 miles north of where the shape shows it should be. So anyway, all righty, thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Merritt. And then I see, or I saw, Lila, is your hand still up? I can't see if it is.
It is. Yeah. Can you hear me?
We
Yes.
most certainly can.
Okay. Well, this is a question for Lisa. Lisa, I apologize. I have not made it through the whole draft PEIS yet. But just quick question. Have you or does the document consider like what would happen if there were significant effects seen to productivity in and around a project? Like are there any mitigation measures or could there be mitigation measures for like altering operations? This is more like adaptive management, I guess. Like you wouldn't know until, it's down the road.
Yeah, so I don't have a specific answer for you, but I do think generally, I think this document is ripe for adaptive management and thinking through, how to address gaps. This is my personal opinion. So if you see opportunities or areas where we could apply that type of approach that makes sense, I think that would be a great comment.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I see no other hands. Last call for hands from anybody. Okay, Carrie. I see nothing.
Yep, same here. Okay, then I guess in that case, anyone's welcome to stay on for the rest of the meeting if you like, but I want to thank Lisa and also Celia, of course, for presenting today and joining us. We really appreciate it. And I know that you also have a support staff. I saw Ellen on here and I think some other BOEM staff. I don't remember for sure, but anyway, I know it's a team effort and it takes a lot and we really appreciate it. Yeah, we'll probably have questions for you, Lisa, and we will be in touch. Oh, the one other thing I wanted to mention, I can't remember if you said this during your slideshow, but there's some late January public meetings where I guess you'll be taking formal comments. Is that right?
Yeah, Carrie, you're a little quiet, but I can hear you. And you asked just to get a reminder about the the draft comment period. So there's two ways to comment. One is on the regulations.gov on the docket for written comments. It's definitely our preference. It's a file that lives in perpetuity and is public. But we do have two opportunities for verbal comment, and that is on I'm trying to find the slide, the 28th and the 30th. Does that sound right? I'll put it in the chat just to make sure that everyone has it.
That does sound right. I'm looking at the page. The one was the 28th at 5 p.m. and January 30th at noon. I'll throw that link in the chat. It might already be there, but
yeah. And one more chat is just the website again, the project. Thank you. I appreciate the comments. Very helpful. Thank you so much for taking the time.
And we thank you very much. Okay, so now we can turn to next steps and a timeline. Mike, why don't I share that timeline that we scoped out, and if you want to talk through it a little bit while I find it and share it.
I would love to, but I really don't want to because it's daunting.
I know,
it's on the bottom of the Google Doc for the agenda. If you're looking for it.
Yeah, that's exact. I'm just trying to find the right There we go. And I see your names in it. I will share that. I have the technology. And I will zoom in a bit. So you should see after adjourn. Do you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So as we noted at the outset, right, the comment periods for the two draft programmatic EISs close within 8 days of one another, which is going to put a significant burden on our time. So when Carrie, Susan, and I had our pre-MPC meeting sort of confab, we tried to devise a schedule, an internal schedule for, getting these comment letters drafted, reviewed, and then to the council with plenty of time for their review. Kind of the methodology, the approach that we took was we wanted to ensure that each of these letters were made available to the council 2 weeks before they were due. That's our typical time frame for the QR letter process. So looking at and I'm going to pick on BOEM here now because we just heard from them, but their comment letters are due on the 12th, on February 12th. So working backwards from that, we envisioned that we would want to get a final draft of the combined letter, the consolidated letter to them no later than the 29th of January. That would give them the 2 weeks to, go through it, give their thumbs up, propose changes or whatnot, so it would be ready for submission. So the initial deadline here that you see, and I'm going to skip over the 24th, Carrie, just because it wouldn't have made sense to not go about it that way. But our internal thought process was the Habitat Committee and the Marine Planning Committee would work separately to look at the areas that fall within their expertise. We did that with a recent comment letter. I forget what it was for, but it wasn't that far off in our rearview mirror. But internally, we thought, okay, if we can get the Habitat Committee and the MPC drafts to each of their respective advisory bodies no later than January 13th, then we give each of the advisory, we give the MPC 10 days to review the MPC portion, and then we give the Habitat Committee 10 days to review their portion. Have comments to us by no later than noon on the 23rd. And that accounts for a holiday. I think the holiday falls on the 20th, but don't quote me on that. And then what we would do is we would turn around, consolidate those comments into each separate document. And then on the 24th, consolidate those two documents, the Habitat Committees and the Marine Planning Committees, into a final doc, which would then be sent to both the Habitat Committee and the MPC for their review. And the comment period for that internally would be smaller. It would be 4 days because each of the advisory bodies had 10 days prior to that to weigh in on those letters. So we would ask for that for comments on that consolidated document to be sent in to us no later than the 28th. That would give us 24 hours to get those locked in, loaded, edits completed, and then, as we note here, send that to the council on the 29th. Looking at the aquaculture opportunity area, as we note, the comment period for that closes 8 days after the BOEM comment period closes. So not surprisingly, what you'll see generally is that the deadlines, internal deadlines that we have for that comment period are 8 days, and in some cases 7, depending upon a weekend or a holiday. Do we just extend that and make those 8 days later? So it's daunting, yes. It's extended, yes. But, I guess at first what I would like to hear from folks is your thoughts on this proposed timeline. Aside, other than that's crazy, it's never going to happen. We don't really have much of a choice, but that's what we're dealing with here, especially given the holidays. So if anybody has any thoughts on that timeline, if that works with folks, more than happy to hear it. And thank you, Corey, for starting us off.
Hey, Mike. Thanks for putting a timeline together. this works for me. I think it makes sense. And I see you have this in there. It would be helpful to have a huddle to just kind of develop a framework structure of the letter early on, but otherwise I'm okay with this timeline for both of the letters. And I'll be helping out Habitat Committee on Habitat Committee comments for both of these.
Perfect. Yes, yeah, we'll definitely at some point in time have to go sit down and powwow and figure out what the structure of it's going to look like. So I appreciate that, and we'll circle back on that.
Sounds good.
Steve, you have leapt over Corey.
So I just want to volunteer to help with writing both of those letters. But I do point out that my term on the Habitat Committee ends December 31st. So I guess it's up to others to decide whether I can still contribute to this.
Thanks for that question, Steve. Carrie, we talked about that yesterday. I'll let Carrie weigh in. I think.
Yeah, I'll weigh in on that. And thanks for volunteering, Steve. I think your contributions as a HC member would be best if they were done before the end of the year, just to have a clean, sort of dividing line between you acting as a HC member versus Steve acting as, sort of a member of the public or a non-HC member. Now, the other more nuanced question, maybe this is what you were asking, is would your term as a MPC member still continue? Because for obvious reasons. And I've put that question forward, but I don't have an answer for you yet. So, I guess if the answer is that until MPC members are removed, they're still on the MPC, then that gives you a green light, at least at this point. So sorry I can't be a little more definitive right now, but you certainly have the whole month of December at least to weigh in and contribute as you're able.
Okay, thanks, Carrie.
Corey Niles.
Thanks. I forget we got two Corys on the Habitat Committee, and I guess Corey Ridings isn't here to reduce the confusion, but yeah, sorry, I didn't know who you were speaking to earlier, but since you did to Lisa, Mike, I'll point out that you're missing a P in your BOEM EIS as well. And is DPEIS a thing? But more seriously, I was thinking I think these work. I think there is a, jokingly, I think it seemed like 1 out of 3 3-day weekends had an MPC comment period this past year, so which is not ideal. But these things, a lot of effort, and appreciate those of you who've been doing a lot of the work lifting on this, heavy lifting. But it's nice to avoid the weekends and Mondays, even early on Mondays, just to give people, not even just one shot making comments, but maybe responding to things that others have said too.
Yep, I don't at all disagree, Corey, and I'm not going to put my tinfoil hat on and think of a conspiracy theory about ensuring that we have weekends overlapping with our internal stuff. But I hate to say that's the way it is, but that's the way it is. Arlene.
Yeah. Well, Corey already weighed in, and I think she's taking the lead on these two letters. I was going to assist with the draft programmatic EIS. I actually think the schedule's a little off balance. I think this really only allows, considering Christmas and holiday time and people, are scrambling with other things. the time to actually draft the comments is only maybe 3 weeks versus giving 10 days to the committee and then 2 weeks to the council. I would propose a week seems sufficient for the council and, maybe 3 or 4 days for committees. If more time is needed up front. We've done that often in the more distant past where we've given more time to the actual development of the comments and less time to the review period because a lot of people don't really comment on it. So that's just my 2 cents. It just seems kind of soon to me, but that's just my take and I'm not the lead. So do with it what you will.
You're
jump
not
in if
alone in
that's
that
okay.
thought process. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Gary.
No, yeah, thanks, Arlene. When we were putting that straw man together of the dates, we were also thinking about the prior collaborative letter writing efforts, and of course, trying to account for the holidays and all that stuff. So, yeah, we did. At my request, put 2 weeks in as sort of a placeholder for the council review, recognizing that might, be truncated a little bit or shortened. But the other thing is that although it does make it tricky to do this over the holidays, and there's always lots of sort of, staff turnover and distractions and days off, in December and January. But we also got a 90-day comment period, which is helpful. And, we're open to ideas. This is why we're putting this up there. The drafts to each committee would be due on the 13th of January and then the 21st of January. If you guys, if there's consensus to maybe push that back a little bit and shorten the 10-day committee review period, and maybe shorten the council review period, we can do that. Or we can, aim high for these dates and then adjust if we get closer and we're not able to meet it. So that's just my way of saying that, I'm open to ideas. This does give us a fair bit of time, albeit over the holidays, for the drafts to be to the each individual committee. But yeah, this is why we wanted to show this, to see if others, what others think about it. So Arlene, maybe I'll put you back on the spot. If you wanted to adjust these dates, how would you?
Well, I would suggest just giving another week to the 13th. So extend that to the 21st and then at least, and then take a couple days off of the committee review and a few days off of the council review. I can't imagine the council needs more than a week, for review. Because depending on if you want to have a conversation about how to structure the comment letter, that has to be scheduled, or, it may just be a couple of people making that decision, but that has to fit in there too. We haven't had any conversation in the Habitat Committee about if we want to, divvy up comments, or if Corey feels like she, wants to draft them all and then have us review. Like, we just haven't discussed that yet. So I just think we need more time up front. But again, that's just my opinion based on previous experiences.
Yeah, not unreasonable. I will say that, a lot of the council members, once they receive the letter, they then shop it around to various, staffs or departments or whatever. So it makes me a little nervous to right off the bat just allocate 1 week for council review, because they also have busy schedules and need to coordinate and all that stuff. So I'd rather keep that, if not 2 weeks, I'd rather have a placeholder of maybe 10 days for the council to review the letter. At the end of the day, it's their letter. There's also some time that is needed for internal processing and final proofing and editing and stuff like that. So I'd be fine pushing back the 13th date to whatever, but my request would be to preserve at least at 10 days for the council. So I'm letting Mike do the math here. I'll assume none of the MPC or HC members that would object to that. I don't see any hands being raised.
Hey, Carrie, and maybe I misheard you, and maybe I hope that I heard you say this, but didn't you say that if we pencil in, right, that 113 date, and then if we were to, at some point between now and January 13th, obviously it'd have to be more toward the middle, have a check-in call, right, with whoever's going to be responsible for drafting each of these letters to see if that 113 date is still doable. And then if it becomes clear at that point in time that it's not, then maybe we just figure out, well, do we need an extra 8 days? Can we get it done in another, X number of days, and just go about it like that? I mean, is that an approach that would be acceptable rather than, hard coding these dates in here and working backwards? I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I did float that as a possibility. I don't feel really strongly one way or the other. I just know that, at least for me, like the deadline, if it weren't for deadlines, humans wouldn't get anything done, right? And so it always makes me nervous when we, if you have a deadline that doesn't have much wiggle room, then it gives you less flexibility. So, but honestly, like either way is fine with me. We could put it the way that you have it here with, sort of almost a range of dates, and we can check in, in the new year and see where we are. But if, I guess Corey Flannery, maybe I'll put you on the spot. Arlene was asking if, if you're planning to just dive into both of these and draft them up, or if you want to divvy up the work, and then also, what's your thought on this timeline?
Yeah, well, it seemed like we had quite a few HC members that were willing to help out. So if folks are open to some divvying up, I would take that. But, and with the dates, I mean, I don't feel super strongly. I do agree with, I don't mind it being a 113 like initial date with some wiggle room, knowing that if we don't make that, we've got actually quite a bit of time there. If we need an extra week, maybe rather than, or if it's a range. I mean, I don't have a strong feeling with that, Carrie. I would like to shoot to get it earlier, and then if we need more time, sounds like that'll be okay, given that we have a pretty long review period on this. But I'm trying to recall who all from the HC volunteered for which letters. I think we had Steve and Arlene and Waldo.
And Eric.
And Laura. Yeah, I mean, given all the folks willing to help, I'd like to divvy up some of it. I can help figure that out, like what makes the most sense, especially looking at our past letters.
Okay, well, maybe what we can do is the, sort of principles here, we can draft up, take what we have here and draft up some guidance. I think it would be really helpful to have at least a really broad brush outline, and, sort of a structure for these letters so that the drafters can more easily plan to plunk in language, and they'll know sort of where it is and which section and that sort of thing. So I think that can happen over the next few days, maybe into early mid next week. And yeah.
In response to Arlene's comments, would there need to be an internal habitat committee deadline before sharing with MPC? I thought that was this first review period, right? Like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the first one.
That's the first one, is to send it to just HC and just MPC, and then we'll consolidate after. Okay. Just double checking. So there's 2 periods of review really for each advisory body.
Yes. Yeah. And I think the more important one would be the committee. So when the Habitat Committee reviews, what you and Arlene and whoever else drafts up, and same with the MPC, and then we'll consolidate them, send them back out for, one last round of review. That one would be shorter. That one is the one
Right.
that Mike said would just be about 4 days. So, but yeah, that's the plan. So you get 2 shots at reviewing that, and then I know several of you have, when it goes to the council members send it to you, then you get another chance to take a look. But
That makes sense. I guess I have one more comment on the timeline. Just depending on the comments we get back, it looks like we have a day to address comments and then send out a consolidated the next round. That could work, or just, we might get, there might need to be some back and forth there too. So just considering that could delay the timeline a little bit.
yeah, that's a good point.
And to that end, Carrie, I would imagine that, and we did this with that prior comment letter, right? Like we worked separately, and then we sent the drafts to the HC and the MPC, and then we kind of behind the scenes worked on merging those 2 documents before we got comments back from the other ABs and the other ABs, and then just kind of fit them in to that kind of background merge document so that so that it wouldn't be a stupidly heavy lift on that day between the time that we received the comments and intending to get that consolidated out. Right? Kind of trying to be a little bit proactive in that sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Laura Ingleswood, thanks. We forgot to mention your name too. You had offered. Or maybe I was thinking of the other Laura, but anyway, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. No, it was me.
So Carrie? Oh,
yes.
No, I'll let Jessica can jump ahead by all means.
Thanks, Mike. I just wanted to let everyone know the reason why I'm remaining semi-silent in all of this discussion around timelines is that I wanted to let the MPC know that this will be my last MPC meeting for at least the next 6 months, because I am going on a job rotation starting December 16th as our Habitat Division Administrator. So at ODFW, we're trying to currently think about and finalize what and if backfills will look like. And so I'll let everyone here know that as soon as possible, but just didn't want you all to think I was ignoring this process and just trying to skimp out. I will have a draft that I'm going to send to Carrie, Mike, and Suze on that cumulative impacts framework. I've been working on that since the council discussed it in November, and what the table will look like to send out before the March meeting for all MPC members to get feedback from each one of your groups on research and data needs questions that are kind of either in support of NIMS strategy or ones that are missing from that strategy that you'd like for consideration. So I'll be sending all that around so as not to leave a gaping hole, but appreciate everyone letting me step away for the next 6 months.
Well, for the record,
Wow.
we didn't.
I don't think you asked for anyone's agreement.
I just decide to do things and then ask for forgiveness is pretty much what I'm doing.
Well, as you
Thank
know,
you for letting us
will-
know, Jessica. It's big shoes to
you will
fill,
be
but thanks
missed.
for doing your. Yeah, you'll be missed, and we appreciate you trying to leave the MPC and your other various duties in a good place before you step away to what sounds like an exciting opportunity and important to support your agency.
Yeah, thank you.
Hold on. Does this mean you're not going to be part of the HMS roadmap discussion either?
Yeah, it's true, Mike. But I'm going to leave the HMSMT with a really nice draft of that roadmap before I go as well. Lots of drafts coming out of me next week.
Well, perfect. And to that end, Carrie, what I'll try to do before next, well, I was going to say Monday, but let's say next Tuesday, is to go through the BOEM draft programmatic EIS, primarily basing it on the table of contents and picking out the items that I think fall within our purview and send that around to folks so we can get buy-in or not on that, so we can kind of begin to at least focus in on what our comments would be from the fishing industry, fisheries management, and fishing community side of it, not looking at it through the habitat perspective under the assumption that they'll get that part of it done. So I can commit to do that. And then, once we get that out, then folks from the MPC who are interested in specific sections that are identified in there can put their names next to it. And we can go at it through an outline format so we can at least begin to fill it in. And then we can just add prose to the outline bullet points and go from there. If that works for everybody, or you can tell me all the pound sand and I'm fine with that too.
I like it.
Sounds good.
Cool.
Hey, Mike.
Hey,
Um,
Suze.
In our notes that I took in our shared folder, I highlighted some names and issues in there on the BOEM DP EIS discussion that sounded like we should include in the letter. So that you might be able to just plug some of that into some of the sections you're going to put in the outline. And maybe we can ask those people to write something up about that or something. But I thought Lisa made some comments that those were good comments to include, or we thought they were good comments. So I just highlighted those. So just for your information.
Perfect. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Yep.
Carrie, well, I'm going to put Lila on the spot because Lila, you have something you want to bring to our attention again? If you're still here.
I am. Yes, thank you, Mike. So I sent the MPC all an email letting you know that the call for nominations for the National Academy study on impacts of shipping, or impacts on shipping and commercial, tribal, and recreational fisheries from the development of renewable energy on the West Coast. That call for nominations has been extended until January 5th. So I did send you the email with the links to that in the background. And I saw Corey's response, so I will turn it to Corey if he wants to say something. But I do thank you, Corey, for highlighting that the nomination form, it's not just for nominating somebody to be on the panel, but also could be nominating yourself to be a speaker at one of the meetings of the committee or a reviewer. So anyway, please do look at that. It's great that the Academy's extended the time frame for that.
Thank you, Lila.
Thank you. Corey, do you have anything to add?
No, well, again, reading is hard, and despite you pointing that thing out to us at least twice before, we were assuming that it was a national level type of effort, but somehow clued into the fact that it was West Coast, at the very last day in the previous deadline. So, and also understanding that NIMS is not allowed to be on the panel. Kind of WDFW, like, well, if you're going to talk about West Coast fisheries, it's not like the world is populated with those. So, yeah, if you're going to want to know about Washington fisheries, then WDFW would like to be involved in some form or fashion. And if just presenting information to the panel, maybe that's best, but we're reviewing the report. But yeah, as this Marine Planning Committee knows, I think whoever is on this panel or staffing it would have to come to the States and to learn more about the fisheries that happen on the West Coast and the tribes, of course. And I don't know if Steve wants to speak up, but I know he's been talking to them about the tribal fisheries.
Yeah, and to that point, Corey, I had a conversation with the folks from there yesterday because I was nominated, and they're looking for 12 to 14 people. The intention is to have this study done by the end of next year. And to that end, they are going to front load meetings. I think that they said that they were intending to have 3 to 4 meetings, a kickoff meeting in DC in February sometime, planning to come out to a council meeting to introduce themselves and maybe to gather more insights. But it was fisheries experts, fisheries management folks, also the shipping industry. So it's not, that those 12 to 14 individuals aren't all going to be, fisheries rep. It's going to be spread out across the interests that are specified in that bill. So, but it's going to be a daunting task. The members of that committee itself will be the ones responsible for drafting the report, with the national academies taking a more backseat editing role. And then it is intended that document will be peer reviewed as well. So a lot of time to be spent on that in a very short period of time, just to add that context and clarity in. And Jessica, did you threw your hand down? Did I mention what you were going to talk about?
Yeah, I was going to ask about timeline just based on my announcement and ODFW's capacity. So thanks for giving an idea of what that time commitment looks like from both from like a participation in that group.
Yeah, their estimation was 10 to 20 hours a month, which my guess is that's going to undercut what the actuality will be. But that's, that when they were asking about availability, that was what they forecasted. And then maybe Lila's going to step in and tell me I'm wrong and clarify things even more.
No, thank you, Mike, for adding those details. I just wanted to say that I put a link in the chat to the requirements of the study, and to underscore what you were saying about this is a very diverse set of requirements they're going to have to that this committee is going to have to address. And so even though there are 12 to 14 committee members that they'll be looking for, there's a lot of different topic areas within that. So yeah, like shipping, Coast Guard operations, the offshore wind decision-making process in general. So it's not exclusively fisheries. There's also marine spatial planning. And so, you know, I would recommend thinking about people to be on the committee that do have a pretty broad understanding of West Coast fisheries, and so that they can be, since there's not going to be an entire committee full of fisheries management and science and you know, fishermen on this committee, to try to think about people that will have that broad knowledge of West Coast fisheries. And then for presenters, maybe those could be more specific. But anyway, that's just a thought. I think everybody should throw their hat in the ring if interested. And it will be up to the academies who they select. So. Thank you again.
Perfect. You're very welcome. All right, Carrie, I see no other hand. Oh, crap, I spoke too soon. Steve.
Yeah, sorry to spoil your afternoon, Mike. So, well, since Corey mentioned it, yeah, I'm on the current committee that the National Academies has on offshore wind and fisheries. So they asked me about being on this one, and I figured, hey, in for a penny, in for a pound. So I told them I'd be willing to do this one. It just so anybody knows. So I'll be, if I'm on, I'll be providing some information on the tribal fisheries.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve.
And while I've got unmuted, I'll put or you or Carrie put Lila on the spot a few minutes ago. I'm going to do it again. Lila, is there a chance that we could have somebody from one of the science centers give us a presentation on the strategic science plan that you're working on, so that you know, we know what's happening, and we can all, you know, make any contributions that we might be able to make?
Do you mean the academies committee or the MPC?
This committee.
Oh, okay. Well, we have done a presentation of the science plan, but are you suggesting something more along the lines of a deeper dive discussion on some of the topic areas?
A deeper downwelling, for example. I know George is working on something there. I think that's a good starting point. So if it's not too soon for that, maybe just to give a presentation on what they're planning, what's being done, what will be involved, how long it will take, and so forth.
Well, so I have talked to Carrie and Mike and Susan about Dr. George Waters is offering to do a presentation at the next MPC meeting. I think, what is it, January or February, on the gliders that they just deployed some of the gliders in the Humboldt WIA for that new monitoring program that he mentioned at one of our prior MPC meetings. So yes, you will get a presentation on that and that monitoring plan that they are working on. So we were going to focus on that. And if there is a desire to focus on maybe some of the other topic areas, I think it'd be maybe good to think about some of the topic areas that you'd want to deeper dive on.
No, that is specifically what I had in mind for.
Okay, well, perfect.
So I'm glad to hear it. Do we have the date for the next meeting?
No.
Okay.
Carrie, I'm assuming that there will be a Google poll out in the not too distant future seeking people's thoughts. I mean, I'm going to talk slowly so that I can pull up the council's website. I don't know what the dates are for the March meeting, but if we stick with our traditional, 6 to 8 weeks before it, we're looking at if it's 6 weeks, right, we're looking at the end of January because the March meeting is March 4th through March 11th. If it's 8 weeks, then we're looking at mid-January. And then Carrie, you have you have FR considerations as well, depending upon the date of that meeting.
Yes, we will send a doodle poll.
All right, Griffin, back to you.
All right. Well, if there's no other comments or questions, just checking chats. Then I think we can adjourn this part. We know our next steps. I would say by about the middle of next week, we should have an idea of, an outline and next steps. The HC members that are still here asked if they could stick around and chat a little bit. That's fine. I will leave this meeting open and I'll stay here. Other than that, I think we can probably adjourn the MPC portion of this meeting. I will say I've asked both our presenters today for permission to post the slides to this meeting webpage, and assuming we get permission, then we will do that. This meeting is also recorded, and sometimes it takes a long time for these to process, like hours and hours and hours. But if I start processing it now, hopefully it will be done by tomorrow morning, and I can have our IT staff post it. So the recording should also be available soon. Any last questions or comments before we adjourn the MPC portion of the meeting?
Thank you.
Going on. Okay, yeah, thanks everyone for your participation. Jessica, we won't see you at another NPC meeting for a while, but good luck, and we'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Appreciate that. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And Jessica, you will be missed.
Thanks,
For
Mike.
6 months.
Yeah. You better come back after 6 months.
Right. We'll come find you.
Yeah.
The blink of an eye.
All right, then we'll just take about a 30-second pause here. People can leave. You're welcome to listen to the Habitat Committee if you like, if you don't have anything better to do. But other than that, yeah, thanks again. And Mike and Susan, I'll circle back with you guys later today or tomorrow.
Sounds good. Thanks, Gary. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, everybody.
I think we lost Waldo.
Oh, okay.
I don't think he saw my.
Waldo's on here.
Is he? Oh.
See his name.
Yeah, why would you say that?
Oh, oh, there he is, because I couldn't see your name on the list.
Yeah, me neither. I don't see your name. Oh, whoa, it disappeared for a minute.
I know it did, didn't it? It was gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what they all
It's
say.
not just me. Good.
All right, so we have 3 of you. What's on your mind?
I think we have 4 of us. Laura also?
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, and Laura.
Corey, and then Waldo and me.
It's weird. Laura, your name disappeared too, but then when you
Oh, really?
it shows up.
Oh, that is weird.
That's bizarre.
So I'm just curious, Corey, like, have you gotten into this at all? Where
Yeah.
are you out with it?
I got a long way
Oh,
to
and
go.
Glenn is there too.
What's that?
Sorry, I saw Glenn too, but then he disconnected. Okay.
Yeah, I've gone through the programmatic EIS. I've been focusing on that one. But I definitely
For
need-
the
for BOEM.
Okay.
Definitely need to do a deeper dive. I don't recall volunteering to lead for the AOA, but I definitely volunteered to help with it.
Oh, well, I mean, I guess I'm just figuring because it's in your territory. It's
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it would definitely be helpful to divvy that up. I think me writing both of these will be a lot on my plate for sure. So I guess as far as divvying up, yeah, Steve, you got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so not being a habitat scientist or any kind of scientist, when I volunteered, I really meant to help contribute to the MPC part of the document.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I feel like that's usually how it's been done, right, Steve?
Yeah.
Helping merge. Okay. So, well, I guess question for those that on the HC want to help out, like, I'd like to hear from you all who's interested in helping with which letter. The BOEM versus AOA.
I'm happy to contribute, you know, a little bit to the BOEM letter. I wasn't going to weigh in on the AOA letter this time.
Okay.
I was also expecting to contribute to the BOEM letter. Although listening to the discussion about the aquaculture definitely got my interest up because I have all sorts of concerns. But I'll have to think about that one.
I can help with both, especially if there's not a ton of support working on the aquaculture letter. I'm definitely not as up to speed on the aquaculture compared to BOEM, but I'm happy to do what I can to help.
Cool. Thanks, Laura. Yeah, I haven't opened up the AOA one yet. But and it seems like things have, from what I recall, changed a bit when we last heard about the AOAs. At least it's like more specific now. The area is being called out. So,
Well, there's kind of, you know, just really just having glanced at this today for the first time, or maybe a little bit yesterday, at least for the offshore wind EIS, there's kind of different sections that we might want to think about using for our organization. Like there's a section on just the characterization of the area or of the, you know, the resources, the affected environment, essentially. And then there's the section on the impacts themselves and
the
and
impact
that's
reducing factors.
and that's kind of broken down into, you know, one project versus multiple all five projects, the way they have it broken down in the document. So you could kind of tackle it, you know, in these big chunks, like that's one chunk, then the impacts is another chunk, which has two sub sections. You know, one is sort of the more cumulative issue of the five projects altogether. And then there's the volume 2, that's volume 1. And then volume 2 is all the appendices, which includes the mitigation measures.
Right. Which I think are like kind of also in volume 1 as well, but yeah.
They're mentioned, but it's just, I mean, all of it's very brief, very, you know, brief statements. So they are mentioned in volume 1, but volume 2 is where there's a little more meat on the bones for those.
Yeah.
But not a lot. I mean, it's just a table I don't know if they're discussed more in detail in narrative. Maybe they are. I can't tell. But I mean, you know, and then the idea of best practices, which kind of feeds into mitigation. Like there's really no mention of best practices except for tribal best practices, and one other topic, whales, marine mammals. So there's kind of sections like, you know, if you wanted to break it up that way, I guess.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about breaking it up that way. I was thinking about breaking it up, and I like that, Arlene. I was thinking of it more as like the different chapters on, like they have their water quality under physical resources, and then benthic resources section, coastal habitat section, EFH section.
Yeah.
Cumulative impacts. That was where my brain was going, but
Kind of more of the resource topic
yeah,
itself.
but I'm not
And then
tied to
under
yet.
that. Yeah, no, it's
Um,
fine. We're just kind of thinking out loud. But then
Uh-huh.
under that, like if you were looking at, you know, one aspect of that, you would kind of cross over all these different sections.
Right.
Because then you'd have to go into mitigation for that issue. Let's say it's just, you know, coral and sponge,
Yeah.
right?
Which might make more sense, like if you're diving into upwelling, to kind of cover in your comments, like how it was addressed in the program, I guess, how it's, and then like the measures and the best practices, whatever, like all of those other sections you brought up, how they cover that resource or that, yeah, I guess resource.
Yeah, either way, there's going to probably be some redundancy.
Exactly.
You know, like if you're talking about mitigation measures for rocky habitat versus mitigation measures for coral and sponge or something else, there's going to be kind of a redundancy, and we just have to, you know,
and we'll just have
figure it
to
out.
converge and figure that out. Yeah, and I feel like other big topics that'll maybe hit on all of these are, like Lila brought up the idea of adaptive management, and Lisa's response of like if there are places where we can point to where we think adaptive management is needed. Buffers. I don't know how those are addressed yet in the programmatic AS, but I don't think they're really
It just says there'll be buffers. That's all.
And another thought is like there's like also the cable corridors versus the lease areas too, and that's maybe another way to break up. But again, there's redundancy there as far as like habitat impacts, whether it's from a cable or a lease area. Like impacts could be different, but there'll be also redundancy. So
yeah. Also, you know, not knowing where the state is going to fall on this, like, because the state's perspective, like California's is a little bit different than Oregon's, you know, so.
Yeah, and we're going to be doing a joint letter with the other agencies too, so it'll kind of, I don't know how that's going to affect the timeline yet. Like, it might be a while till we know. It's just a little bit, you know, there's other folks involved, I guess, a lot of other folks involved in our letter.
Yeah. Well, like for me, like I don't know what California's position is, and if this, you know, like I would be thinking about cable burial and all of that, whereas California may have a different approach to cables. So I think, you know, you'd probably want to make sure you're dealing with the state water stuff, you know, that you're writing.
Yeah, I think that's been
things that are
pretty,
related to
like that
state
one
waters.
specific has been pretty consistently, the same comment has come from the state. But yeah, I'm sure there will be some things that come up. Waldo?
Well, I guess just a comment. I was wondering if, I mean, how much of the things that we've already, because a lot of these things have been discussed before, and been part of our various responses having to do with offshore wind in the past. And I'm just wondering how much, and I guess that'll just sort of happen, I guess, organically, right? In terms of how the lessons from already what we've already provided can feed into this, right? I mean, it's not like we're starting out with not having a lot of history already thinking about this.
Right. Yeah, one example that comes to mind is in the council previous letter and in Oregon's previous letter when it came to offshore wind or the lease areas process that we just went through. We started pointing to the Atlantic region of best practices for seafloor mapping and site characterization. And we were consistent. In fact, NIMS had this in their comments as well. Consistent asking for that best practices document to be part of the requirement, and yet BOEM intentionally did not include it. And they told us, they had no intention of including that, and they didn't. So that would be something I think we'd want to bring back up. But it's probably going to go nowhere because they've already decided they're not going to include it.
Which best practices document is this, Arlene?
So this is the NIMS Atlantic region, and they
like
developed.
Darko?
Or it's a guidance document, but it's best practices. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
On seafloor mapping
Yeah.
and site characterization.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be an example.
Yeah, and we've been talking to NIMS about that. We've been deferring to that as well, that guidance document. So, I mean, I do think it's still worth.
Yeah, it's worth repeating. It doesn't take anything to repeat it, but
yeah.
This draft programmatic EIS is now, we're at a different stage. And so and one question I had that I didn't ask is if it's something that isn't discussed in the programmatic EIS and identified as an impact and that there needs to be some kind of mitigation or best practices for it, if it's not even mentioned in the programmatic EIS, is it then like off the table in terms of the individual, lease EISs? Like, does there have to be that umbrella? It has to be under the umbrella in order to even be brought up later?
I don't think so. I don't know for sure, but I don't think that's like a rule with programmatic documents.
Yeah, I don't think so either. It's a really good question, but yeah, I don't think so. I mean, the idea of the programmatic is to identify commonalities and where there are, common resources or actions or whatever and impacts. But I don't think it rules out
Okay.
something else.
Yeah. I mean, one thing, I was hoping, I'm not surprised though, but I was hoping to see a little more meat on the bone, so to speak, particularly because of the, what's it called? The development envelope, right? The project development envelope. That there's all this, all these details and metrics and everything about the build out and the spacing and everything. And that's specific to California, and it's specific to, these WIAs. So why not incorporate some of that into the EIS? I mean, it's specific to that region.
Yeah, I think the problem with the design envelope is it's such a big range. As far as like the number of turbines, I forget the number, but it's like 20 to 600 per Lisa. Like the rate, and it's like all the possible ways of, not all the possible, ways, like multiple ways they could be anchored, multiple. So it's like only helpful to a degree, because it's so variable what a project could look like, even with the design envelope. Yeah, Laura.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also just curious if it's, also a matter of programmatics not needing to be as detailed as like project specific EISs. And then also I think Lisa mentioned like page limit. I know you can get like waivers, like we had to definitely get a waiver for the EIS for Chumash Heritage Sanctuary, but there are like stricter page limits
That's
now
right.
on NEPA documents.
Yeah, that was
saying, a lot of times we have to be like pretty broad about what we're talking about because of can't just put everything in there.
Yeah. Yeah, and not to say that it should be like super detailed. It's just that it just seemed like they could flesh out the impact discussion a little bit more based on the potential, like from A to Z, this is the range of potential impacts, Anyway, that would be a comment I would be inclined to make in this letter.
Well, so the way, trying to think of how we, can divvy up a little bit. I guess I'd be leaning, and I'm just focusing on the BOEM one right now because I know everyone's interested in that, and it's kind of easier to start with one. And I can follow up with Laura on the AOA letter, and that one we have a little bit more time. But I think maybe trying to separate it out by resource, but then tackling it in the way that Arlene brought up, as far as like, how is it characterized? What are the impacts that they describe in the programmatic ES to that resource? There's impacts that aren't described that are missing, and what are the mitigation measures and best practices, and like viewing each of those resources like through that lens in developing comments. And then there'll probably be its own section as far as like, and viewing it too, if there's like an adaptive management piece to include in there, but that might be its own comment section, is like an adaptive management section and a cumulative impact section. And so the way I would see breaking up resources is, the physical resource section, which is pretty much just, I think, water quality, what would apply to us. And then under biological resources is benthic resources, and they have an offshore and an inshore section for that. Coastal habitat, and then EFH, which obviously EFH will have overlap with both the benthic and coastal, but we also have our very like specific EFH comments we usually provide. And I think upwelling and impacts like oceanographic processes, I'm pretty sure that's covered under the benthic resource section, I want to say, if I'm remembering correctly. So if there's a resource anyone's like really interested in kind of taking the lead on that section, whether it's say it's upwelling or deep sea corals, maybe that's a good way to divvy up some of the tasks.
I could, if you're looking for somebody to take on the upwelling one, I could do that.
I was thinking of you, Waldo.
I'm glad he said that.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big one. It's an important one.
That's under the physical resources heading in the EIS.
It should be under physical.
It should be under physical. I think it is brought up under physical, but then I could be wrong. I think it like is more described under the biological, which I found strange, but I could be wrong about that.
Oh, it's under benthic.
Right, which is under biological resources. But if you're willing to take upwelling, that's super helpful. And we have a lot of language on that from our past letters, as you know.
Well, and they provided that flyer with some QR codes to recent papers. Some of those we probably already have, but although my phone camera could not pick up that QR code, I think it's a bad copy of the codes. But that's a resource if you wanted to go there too. I mean, I could add some content about, like, I don't know that we want to, suggest that they flesh out the description of the affected environment. Like, they're probably not going to add more than what's there now. But we might want to focus more on the impact side of it, right? And the mitigation side is what
Yeah,
I'm
I
thinking.
think that's more the focus. Impact, mitigation, best practices, any room for adaptive management, cumulative impacts. Like those are the framework comments around.
I mean, I'm okay contributing to that, but I think Laura with the sanctuary resources, like I'm wondering what you think about working on that one also, especially with mitigation and best practices and stuff.
Laura might
not to put you on the spot.
I think she's having.
I
she's going to
just
be able to.
I just joined my phone. That was perfect timing. Yeah, my computer's frozen, but I can weirdly hear everyone on my computer. But now I'm on my phone. Yes, I can contribute to that. I honestly have not had a chance to look through the EIS completely, and I missed the first 2 hours of the MPC meeting, so I'll have to catch up on the recording when it's released on Lisa's presentation as well, but I'm happy to contribute to that part.